I love when that let's go thing comes on because that means it is time to roll. Irish Breakdown Nation, IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher, and I am joined by that guy right there, Vince D'Addario. He is usually not allowed to eat during the show, but today is the last day of summer school, and Vince is celebrating, so he is punishing some pizza on the last day of school.
Gotta love it.
That guy over there is Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown, and we are going to dive into our Irish Breakdown mailbag. But before we begin, a couple quick things. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We went past 10,000, so now I'm begging for you guys to help us get to 20, because that's it, right? We got 10 down, 10 to go, right? And then also, if you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. And of course, as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Before we dive into the questions, though, fellas, I wanted to remind people we will have a second show today at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2024 tight end Jack Larson. And I'm sure we'll have some questions about him in the show. He is going to be making his decision known tonight at 5 o'clock. It'll be between Notre Dame, Michigan, Clemson, North Carolina, and NC State. So we will carry that live. We will discuss whatever his decision may be and what's next for Notre Dame at tight end recruiting in the 2024 class. Guys, before we begin, I think it's smart for us to kind of first kick off a little bit about the news that broke today with Jabron Payne, the freshman running back for Notre Dame. We found out about this 4 or 5 days ago. I think I told you guys a few days ago about this. Obviously, this is disappointing news, but we finally got the go-ahead to run with it today. And so he had the surgery today as well, according to the tweet from Notre Dame. The odds of him coming back at any point in time in the 2022 season is slim. That's just the nature of an Achilles injury. It's also something that Notre Dame reported in their tweet. So I feel it's appropriate to talk about since they tweeted about it. And this is a blow, guys, because this is now the second running back that sustained an injury. Logan Diggs obviously tore his labrum which is a shoulder area injury in the spring game. He is expected to be back at some point in time this fall, but not likely to be at the beginning of the year. And then when he does come back, you're talking about a shoulder injury for a running back. You know, you don't just come back like, okay, here's 20 carries, in his first game back. That's not normally how it goes. So puts him in a little bit precarious situation. But the first thing is this is just a blow because you guys both had a chance to see Jabron Payne firsthand, Vince. And I know he was a kid that when you and I talked after that first practice that you were at, you were like, hey, this number 20, because I don't think Vince even knew who he was. I don't think they gave like a roster that day. Vince was like, I don't know who number 20 is, but that guy's really good.
Yeah.
And so this is certainly a loss for Notre Dame. Even though he's never played, it's a loss for Notre Dame, guys.
It's a huge loss for Notre Dame. I mean, we talked about the reasoning behind the running back room being so good is because of the depth, and it's high quality depth. Well, you have now lost 2 of the 5 from that depth, and that's massive, right? And we've heard Coach McCullough talk about the fact that there's 8 starting positions in the running back room, right? And he was looking for a space for a lot of those guys to take some of those starting spots. And you've eliminated some really good options, at least at the beginning of the season. And with Logan Diggs, from what I can tell, he's not going to be back to probably October-ish, depending on how things go, right? And so for at least a month, you're going to be looking at a 3-man backfield if you don't count walk-ons, right? And that's concerning, but you can get away with 3 without any problem as long as you don't sustain any more injuries. And that's a big if, because Notre Dame is going to be focused on running the football, and running back, you get hit every time you touch the ball, right? So it is going to be very difficult.
And when you're not touching the ball, pass pro,
exactly,
stuff like that, right?
Absolutely correct. So, and Chris Tyree has some injury history. We've talked about that, right? So it's going to be very interesting. We don't know really anything about the kid coming from IU, a whole lot about him. At least we haven't put our eyes on him in a Notre Dame uniform, and so, yeah, it's going to be tough with 3.
Sure.
You may even see one of those walk-ons get a little bit of time here and there, depending on how things go, and that's troubling. Anytime you use the word walk-on, that's troubling to me.
Sure, although there's some guys that started off as walk-ons are pretty good football players.
No question.
But that's not what these guys were recruited to be. These guys weren't recruited for the same thing. Chris Fink was recruited as a walk-on, but Chris Fink was a guy that they knew could play.
Sure.
right? And not every walk-on is on the team for the same reason. And I think, the first guy I think of is Chase Ketterer, who I actually think is a pretty good football player.
Absolutely.
But you don't want to be, you can beat a lot of teams with that. You just, what it is you've got to get through the Ohio State game.
Yeah.
Then you got about a month until the BYU game.
Sure.
To try to survive.
Look,
and there's some, if Chris Ketterer's your number 3 back, you can beat Marshall and Cal.
Absolutely.
North Carolina.
No question. Chase Ketterer is a good running back. Okay.
Right. For
what he is, for what he was recruited to do.
Yeah.
He was recruited to be the option quarterback.
Right.
But he can run the football, and running the football is running the football. I mean, he has talent, and they just brought in the Mishawaka quarterback who runs triple as well. He can run the football. You know what I mean?
Get you through some games if you need to, but it's not. He's not going to be. You're not beating Ohio State with him. You're not.
You can't sustain a bunch of injuries. That's the bottom line.
And Ryan, the other part of this too is we talk about 3 running backs, but Jabron Payne's a guy that we broke down quite a bit here, and very talented player, but he's not a guy we've seen healthy for 2 years, and so even though he's on the depth chart as a 3rd guy, there's a lot of unknowns even with the guy like Jabron Payne. But I'll say this, Ryan, and I'll kick it to you. If Jabron Payne is healthy, the one positive is this kid's going to come to the year fresh because he has not played a lot of football. He may be rusty, but he's going to be fresh. But he's a talented kid. It's just that uncertainty of we just don't know where he's at health-wise because he hasn't been healthy since the sophomore year of high school.
I mean, it ends up being big that they ended up taking a second back in last year's class, right?
Yes,
because now you're looking at the depth piece, and it is very troubling to say the least. And like you said, I mean, Jabron Payne misses his whole junior year. And then what did he have, Brian, his senior year? Like 60 carries or something like that?
Yeah, it was like he had like less than 300 yards rushing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was very limited opportunities. So, like you said, he basically hasn't played in a couple years. Now, when he's healthy, he's a pretty dynamic player, man. Like he's got some juice to him. He's got some ability as a pass catcher. There's some talent there for sure. I mean, this is not a talent issue. This is just more of a situation where I think that they were kind of hoping that you might be able to ease Jabron along a little bit, right? Make sure that he's fully healthy, maybe even redshirt him, do all that type of stuff, and then kind of ease him into the fire a little bit. But now, I mean, he is going to be forced because, like Vince said, you're going to have Diggs at some point, you would think, in the 2022 season, but it's no absolute when exactly that will be. And without having a Jadarian Price, you need a guy now that's going to be able to supplement some carries or some touches, I should say. So I think that Jabron Payne now is very important to this football team. He's not just a guy that's going to be eased along. He's going to be a guy that's going to have to come in. He's going to have to play a little bit.
I'll say this again, if the current group can stay healthy, the guys that are left, I'm not overly worried about the ability to run the football.
Right.
We've talked a lot about Chris Tyree the last week. And full disclosure, there was an article I wrote about Chris Tyree that came out a few days ago. I had an idea that Jadarian Price was injured, but we had been talking about that and working on that article for a while. So it wasn't because of Jadarian Price being hurt that article came out. It just was the timing, but I also wanted to be honest with people and just let them know kind of the timing of the whole thing. But the reality is if Chris Tyree is healthy, he can be a 1,000-yard back. We discussed this the other day. We'll need to dive into that again, but he's going to do it on fewer carries. He's not a 15 to carry, then 3 to 5 catches per game for 12 games kind of guy if you want to keep him fresh and healthy and playing a dynamic game. So a second back will have to step up. I don't think Jadarian Price getting hurt affects Chris Tyree at all. I don't think Logan Diggs getting hurt necessarily impacts Chris Tyree at all. If Chris Tyree is healthy and playing his game, he's a starting running back. And anyone at Notre Dame will tell you that. Here's the thing, though. The injuries have opened up a golden opportunity for Audric Estime. And we had a couple comments about that. Notre Dame 2-1-6-4. I, for one, am really excited to see what Estime can do. Great opportunity for the man-child. What do you guys think? I hate seeing kids get opportunities like this because of someone else being injured. But it's the world we live in, right, in college athletics. So the opportunity is there, and I'm not going to celebrate why the opportunity is there, but the opportunity is there.
Sure.
And sometimes we forget this kid is really good. You know what I mean? Ryan, you're talking about a guy, the level of football he played against New Jersey, and it's not bad level. This is a kid that rushed for 1,800 yards and averaged 9.8 yards per game and 22 touchdowns in 8 games.
Yeah, I was about to say, it was only like 8 football games. Yeah, it was crazy numbers.
This is, and as you said, Ryan, the teams he's playing against. He's not playing against some small level of football nobodies, that are going to Union and Rowan. He's playing against really good football teams.
Was that a shot at Rowan?
No, not at all. I coached against both of those teams. I'm 0 for 2 against Rowan. Also coached against Union, and played against William Patterson. So I'm very familiar with that level of football. But that's not who he's going against. He's going against other Division I FCS caliber football players and put up the numbers he put up. So, you hate to see the reason why, but this is certainly an opportunity for Audric Estime to step in and show what he's capable of being as a player.
And he's more aerodynamic now too, because he dropped that second digit off of his jersey. Yeah. He's only got the single digit. He's more aerodynamic now, so it's all good.
He also has now the best number in college football. Which helps.
Let me guess. You were number 7 in college?
Ding, 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 ding. And also the greatest quarterback of all time, wore number 7 for the Broncos.
There you go.
No comments in response to that. If you value your job, you will not respond to that comment, right?
Jimmy Clausen?
I saw it. But in all seriousness, this is obviously a tremendous opportunity. And I'm actually very intrigued by what a 1-2 punch, regardless of circumstances, of what a 1-2 punch of Chris Tyree and Audric Estime can be. Absolutely. Because they are very different players.
That's a thunder and lightning that I'm okay with. You know what I mean? And again, if they keep the 3 guys healthy the remainder of the season, and then you bring Logan Diggs into the equation as well mid-season, I have no problem with it. No problem with it. It's just worries me from a depth standpoint. It's the same argument that I would use at wide receiver.
Sure.
The guys that they're planning on playing are going to be good. Like, I have a lot of faith in those guys that they're going to be playing. It's if you have to sustain a few injuries, then it's the depth issue that becomes part of the equation. Same thing at running back now. The top line guys, the 3 guys that are going to get playing time, I have so much faith in. It's just if they have to sustain an injury, then we have to rethink it a little bit. But if those guys are healthy, I mean, granted, there's going to be dings and there's going to be things of that nature.
We're talking about being able to step up and play.
Exactly.
Right?
So
running backs are healthy up until the first week of fall camp is over. I mean, that's the entire football team as far as being 100%. I mean, that's
absolutely. So yeah, I have no worries about the guys that are going to be getting touches in the backfield for Notre Dame. It's just they need to stay healthy. That's the bottom line.
Ryan, there's another aspect of this too that we have to consider is as far as taking carries away. This is a little bit of a different situation because, number one, I think they can do some really unique things out of 20 personnel, which we discussed in a recent show. But, especially in the big games, Ohio State, BYU, Clemson, USC, maybe Stanford, depending on what they be, BC. Those are games where there's another kid that's going to get a lot of touches in those games too. And that's number 12, Tyler Buckner. And then also of what you and I discussed the other day, Ryan, about the receiving depth chart. Ryan, that was you and I, right? Like I get the shows confused. You and I talked receivers, right?
Yeah, you did.
Then you and I talked breakout players.
Correct.
You also have situations of like a Braden Lindsey who can get 2 to 3 touches a game on jet sweeps and reverses.
Yep.
You have Avery Davis can do some of those things. Remember, Avery Davis was running back in 2019. If there's an emergency situation, it's not ideal. You don't want to have to do this. But, he's another guy that could do some things, get some carries. But at the end of the day, the guy that's really going to help with the workload is number 12 in the big games. I'm not running Tyler Buckner 15, 20 times against Marshall. I'm not doing it against Cal. I'm not doing it against UNLV and Syracuse. But if I got to run him 20 times against Ohio State to win that game, then you know what? I'm running him 20 times against Ohio State to win that game.
Absolutely.
And I think that has to be considered too when you talk about the workload on the 1-2 punch of Chris Tyree and Audric Estime, even before we get into Jabron Payne. So I think that helps as well and must be considered, Ryan.
Yeah, no, you have to pick your spots with Tyler Buckner. If you handcuff his athleticism, then you're not using it the right way, right? Like he's a dual threat option. He's got incredible athleticism. He's a very strong runner. There's a lot of things to like about him in the quarterback design run game. That's why he had the role he had last year, right? Like, because that element was too valuable to not use in some capacity. So I agree that I think it's more just about, like you said, you got to pick your spots, right? Even if it's in an important ball game, even if he's not running the ball at a high volume, maybe it's a 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line where you just line up and run quarterback power, or it's a very crucial situation. You have to mix them in, and the zone read game, I think we all agree, is going to be a huge part of the offense. If it's running correctly, even the pass off of the read. So I think that is right up Tyler Buckner's alley. I think that he brings a dynamic element, a physical element. You're always going to have to worry a little bit because then you have to start talking about he's been banged up at points too, but you can't shy away from what makes
Right.
Tyler Buckner so special.
You have to use him as an option. The threat of Tyler Buckner has to be a reality, right? There were times that they were doing zone read concepts, and there was no threat that the quarterback was going to take off with the ball, right? With Jack Cohn. That's just a reality. You have to have the threat of that. Otherwise, it takes away the effectiveness of that entire scheme and of that the entire makeup of the way that is supposed to be run. So, yeah, you're going to have to run him against those teams. There's no question. And in the big games, if that's what they're giving you, you got to exploit it, man. I mean, that's how you win those games. There's no question about it. So you got to be smart about it. I mean, that's why these coaches get paid what they get paid, that they're really good coaches. They're going to be smart about it, but you have to use it to your ability. There has to be the reality that he's going to throw it. It can't be a situation where you go into a game like we can't have Tyler on the ball and you're running things where he's not even an option. That tips the defense, and then they're able to be effective.
You have to run your offense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where a guy like Drew Pine is so valuable, right? I mean, you now, again, do you do it to beat Cal? You shouldn't have to do it to beat Cal. You shouldn't have to do it to beat Marshall.
Agreed.
You shouldn't have to do it again. But again, in those big games, whatever it is, if it means 5 times, if he's a decoy, I don't care. You just got to do what you got to do to win the game.
Right.
Here's where I think the injury to Jabron Payne could have the biggest shakeup. That is in the kick return game. Because with the depth chart issues, if Chris Tyree is your number one back, Now, if Audric Estime earns that number one back and Chris Tyree sort of like 7 to 10 touches, 7 to 10 carries, 3 to 5 catches, I'm okay with him taking 3 or 4 kick returns, hopefully fewer kick returns in a game. But if he's the number one back and he's going to be 10 plus carries and 3 to 5 plus catches, I think you have to think about putting somebody else back there to return kicks. Now, the problem is one of the guys that we talked about, we've addressed this before. Who was the guy we talked about replacing him if he does become number one back? It was Jabron Payne, you know? Yep. So if he's out, I think that does add something to where Brian Mason's going to have to, think, and along with the offensive staff and Marcus Freeman, that's one of those staff decisions that you all have to sit down and say, hey, look, Coach Mason, I know that this is our number one option, but, we've got it. Because, again, you're talking about volume. Is it more important to have Chris Tyree healthy for the 30 to 40 to 50 snaps he's going to play on offense and have someone else play 3 or 4 times on the kick return? Because if your defense is as good as you hope it is, you're not returning a ton of kicks in a game. And do you have other guys that can still bring impact potential? I think they do.
I do too.
But the key is going to be finding it and who that is.
Right.
But if Chris Tyree is that guy, I would that's one thing I would take off his plate. Vince, I'm going to ask both of you this question. We'll start with Vince.
Yeah,
Vince,
I think I think that's a really good point, and I think that there are options on this roster. I don't know that I could come up with exactly who those options are, but I was thinking to myself, that's going to be one of the first things I'm going to be paying attention to when we go to practice is who is catching punts, who's catching kickoffs. Who are they putting back there? Usually,
punt won't change a whole lot because Chris Tyree wasn't doing
punts. Yeah, you're right.
It's more kickoffs.
It's going to be very interesting to see how they approach that, to be honest with you. If they, and I don't want to just echo what you just said, but I agree with you. If they can keep his carries under 10, then you keep him back there. That's kind of the golden number for me, but you better have somebody else ready to go that you can step back in there where if Chris Tyree is having a game and you realize that he's going to be getting even more touches than maybe you even planned on, that you can put somebody else back there. Like there has to be a game plan. Look, I trust Coach Mason explicitly, or with this whole situation, he's going to have a backup plan. I'm just saying you better have somebody back there that's ready to go just in case. So you can start with Chris Tyree, but if the balance of the game, it's going a certain way and 25 is hot, then you keep feeding 25, but you put somebody else back there. And again, there's a lot of talent on this roster. This isn't 10 years ago where it's like, okay, well, I don't know who's going to be returning kicks. I think there's a ton of talent, and I think that they're going to have that opportunity to find somebody that's going to be really good back there.
I know the comment someone you just pulled up, Ryan, said Jabron Payne as an option. I feel like he would be good in that role, but again, we're talking about the running back depth taking a hit already. I'm not sure I want to put one of the backup running backs back there on extra, because a lot can go wrong on kickoffs sometimes, man. A lot can go wrong.
My only thought would be it would be a great opportunity to get him some touches and get him in the game and get him in front of a live environment in that situation. If he's the best guy for the job, I'd have no problem doing it, but he'd have to clearly be the best guy for the job for the reason you mentioned, Ryan, which is you can't afford another injury at running back. Right. But it kind of goes back to the Buckner thing. It's like, but you also can't be afraid to go out there. So it's one thing it's a bit hypocritical. My statement's a bit hypocritical because we're talking about taking Chris Tyree off. It's not because I'm afraid Chris Tyree is going to get hurt per se. It's about his workload. Yeah. And as you guys said, Ryan, the hits that a kick returner takes on kick return can be violent. And it's more about the wear and tear, because as we found out, you can get injured walking down the steps in the goo. You can get injured at summer workouts. You can get injured in practice. There's all types of different ways to get injured. Like Vince, when we were young in Major League Baseball, they were a lot more open about how guys got injured. Yeah. I mean, I remember Eric Davis for the Reds going on a 15-day DL one time because he hurt his neck the way he was sleeping on the plane. You'd hear about guys getting injured because they slipped and fell in the shower. Well,
now Sammy Sosa injured himself sneezing. Remember that?
Yeah. Or Andrew Bynum just got traded to the Sixers, and he got hurt bowling. That was my favorite one ever.
You can get injured doing a lot of things, but it's about, okay, are we going to increase the odds by putting a guy in this situation is really the thing you have to think about. So I think that makes it an interesting aspect of it. So
this is actually a decent point by Justin. I just wanted to bring it up here. He says, could it be like an ETN thing at Clemson? He only returned kicks in the big games. And that was on punts. He was returning punts in the big games.
Punts are a little bit of a different animal. Yeah. I mean, if you, it just depends. I mean, if Chris Tyree's clearly your best kick returner, maybe you do have him returning against Ohio State, and then the next few games, right, that you decrease his workload. It just would depend on what the other guys are doing. That would be the thing. Like if somebody steps up, like for example, if we're going into the 2023 season and we're having a similar conversation, I'm like, no, I'm getting Micah Bell back there. You know what I mean? Like I'm giving Mike a tease that, if Notre Dame was able to get one of land those two guys, or I'm going to give Peyton Bowen the opportunity because, he's not really going to play a ton at safety yet, but man, we got to find a way to get this kid to football. So there'd be situations like that. If there's players like that for Notre Dame, I can't think of a lot of secondary players, but maybe this is a thing where Xavier Watts could maybe get an opportunity.
That would be one of the first guys, like kind of off, like outside the box guys that I would try back.
Lorenzo Styles is one that comes to mind. He's a guy that was a good kick returner in high school. So there are some guys. I just think like the depth chart, the kick return, the return game depth chart is going to improve in the next couple of years. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the 2023 class as we get closer to signing day. But I think that kind of wraps it up, guys. I think with that conversation, if some more questions come up, we'll gladly answer them. But I want to kind of dive into the mailbag portion next. But I feel like we've been able to properly address we've properly addressed that. So let's kick things off. We have a super chat from Bayside Tiger 6.
Love that name.
This is a great super chat, and we thank you for the super chat, and this is just hilarious. BK is the Nickelback of coaches. He has a lot of records and media love, but not a Hall of Famer.
Ooh.
That's just a really salty comment, and I
not a Nickelback fan. I
dig it.
Nickels are getting more valuable though, so yes. I think we need to make him a holder or a long snapper instead or something.
It's funny. I actually kind of liked Nickelback when they first came out. I thought that, but then it's like after like the third song, you're like, man, all these songs sound exactly the same,
right.
And you can't really tell the difference. But I'm going to slightly disagree with that. I don't personally like Brian Kelly very much, and I don't personally love the job he did the last 5 years, but a Hall of Fame career as a football coach is built on what you've done for the entirety of your career at all levels. And the fact of the matter is Brian Kelly has 2 national championships under his belt. He did earn the most wins of all time at Notre Dame, which is a longevity award we've talked about.
Sure.
But he also, got Notre Dame to the playoff twice, got them to a BCS championship game. The issue I have with Brian Kelly is he didn't maximize the potential of the program, but he also did some really good things at Notre Dame that I don't think we should just dismiss. So when you look at what he did at Cincinnati, I mean, the greatest 3-year stretch in school history, I think when I did some research at the time, I think they had like 1 or 2 10-win seasons their entire history, and he had 3 in a row. So if you're going to take the entirety of his career, with all due respect, I do think Brian Kelly is a Hall of Famer based on the conditions in which you are a Hall of Famer, which is what you've done at every level of football, not just at the Division I level, or whatever the case may be. But when you take the entirety of his resume, I wouldn't crush people. I wouldn't personally promote him to be a Hall of Famer just for personal reasons. But if I'm being honest, I think the entirety of his resume is that of, there's other Hall of Famers that have less impressive resumes than what Brian Kelly has for the entirety of his career. Is that a fair thing to say, guys?
Yeah, I have trouble with that argument sometimes though, because it's like I always think parlay it to like the NFL conversation for a second. It's just like because people made mistakes in the past doesn't mean that you have to continue to make the same mistake, right? And I don't consider him a Hall of Fame coach. I don't think the resume screams it to me personally, but it's just my point of view on it. So.
But I think that the thing for me is I'm evaluating it based on what the Hall of Fame is, what it represents, not what I think it should be. You know what I mean? Like that's why Larry Karras is in the Hall of Fame, right? For Mount Union. That's why Eddie Robinson is Hall of Fame. They didn't do it at the same level, but that's what it's.
And there's just one Hall of Fame. There's not like a.
No, it's just college football,
Fame.
Right?
Yeah.
Because look, Division III is still college football, right? And if you are a great player at that level, I think there should be some recognition for it. But you have to be like exceptional, and that's the thing for me. When you look at Brian Kelly, he won 2 national championships at Grand Valley. Would have won 3 in a row if a starting quarterback didn't get hurt in like the second round. In 2001 was actually arguably their best team, and then Kurt Ains got hurt. Also built the program to where Chuck Martin was able to win 2 more titles after Brian Kelly left, so I think he played a role in that. He took over a bad Central Michigan team and by year 3 had him in 10 wins. He had the greatest 3-year stretch in Cincinnati's history, led them to the Sugar Bowl a year after. I think they went to the Orange Bowl the year before. This was when they were in the Big East, right? And then, of course, he had the success he had against Notre Dame. So, again, I wouldn't push for it, but based on the criteria that they use, I think a case could be made for it.
I could see it on paper. I could.
If he was a nicer guy, if he wasn't such a a person I dislike, I think probably we'd all have a little bit easier time saying, yeah, you know what, he didn't win the ultimate prize at Notre Dame, but he did some really good things. But that's what you get sometimes when you are don't treat people correct. You're gonna have to really overcome a lot of that kind of stuff. Just Your Ordinary Joe to Super Chat. He says, hey, Vince, what exactly is the procedure you teach baseball players such that 3 guys don't all say, I got it, and bump into each other? Is there a football kickoff counterpart? There's strategy to this, Vince. So let's go and explain that.
So for baseball, it really depends on where the ball is going, right? Most of the time, outfielders have the right of way, so to speak. And if you get called off by an outfielder, you best get out of the way because they're running forward and infielders are running backwards, right? So outfielders generally have the right of way. On the infield, I'll be honest with you, at times I'll yell out who I want to catch it because it's high school and I don't trust a lot of them, and I will yell the name of the person that I want to catch it. And that's that. But normally I'll let them take care of it. There's not necessarily an order on the infield. I don't really want my pitcher to do it just because of the up and down of the mound, and you twist an ankle and we're down the one pitcher that we had anyway, so that would be bad. So you generally let the actual position players take care of it. But that's basically it. You don't want to get too in-depth when you're in high school. So that's basic. Again, I generally call out who catches the ball. So that's really how it goes. Now, as far as football is concerned, usually on kickoffs, there's one guy back. There's not a whole lot that goes into it. It's not like 2 guys back like there used to be or 3 guys back.
Well, there's 2 guys back, but the other guy doesn't.
Up.
Right. Right. And they'll kind of rotate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's not as much calling it, so to speak. But they know who the primary return guy is. And if it's a short kick, then it's whoever can get to the ball the best. They're the ones that are going to call for it.
Yeah, Vince, so you remember Andrew Jones, the outfielder
for the Braves?
Yeah, for the Braves. His son is the top-rated baseball player in the draft this year, Drew Jones, and he pitched for his high school. And it made me cringe because I feel like there were so many highlights where it would be a pop-up to him, and he would go get it wherever it went. I'm just like, oh man, that's insane.
It's dangerous, but at the same time, in high school, a lot of times that's your best player, and so I get it. But man, just get out of the way.
It just made me cringe a little bit. I'm like,
Yes.
oh, I don't
Yes.
like that. All right.
Now, Vince, when I played, the center fielder had like kind of veto power to a
Sure.
degree, and the shortstop had veto power, and then the catcher
Yes.
had veto power in certain situations.
Right.
And I think that's kind of.
I
think that's where I say the kick return is relevant.
Yeah.
Because if a kick returner says I got it, you let it go. But on like pop-up kicks and things like that, you will practice it where one of the two kind of fullbacks can kind of fair catch it.
Right.
Or if it's squib, if it's a squib and it's kicked right at you, you know, there's certain rules, you know, if you're here, you let it go. If you're not, you know, that kind of thing. But
sure.
But if the kick returner says I got it, he's got it. And that was kind of like my, you know, as far as the comparison to, it's like a ball that's hit in that shallow, you know, between, you know, second base and center field, you know, who has it, the shortstop or the center fielder? I was always taught that it's the guy coming up that always has
the outfielder, you know, has the call. It always, and you're right. If it's outfield to outfield, the center fielder has the call. Mm-hmm. If it's outfield versus infield, the outfielder has the call.
Right.
I've had catchers on my team that I trust explicitly, so I let them make the call a lot of times because they can see a lot of things, and if they've got a big mouth like I do, it's very easy for them to be heard. But again, I will yell from the dugout because I trust no one. So,
thanks, Vince.
No problem.
All right. John A1 with a question. Do you suspect the linebackers will be better in coverage as a group in 2022? This is an interesting one, Ryan. And since you are the resident Maris Luafowl fan club member, I will let you address this question. So I suspect the linebackers will be better in coverage as a group in 2022?
Yeah, John, I don't think that it's, I don't even think you need to suspect it. Like, I think it's easily going to happen, to be honest with you. Maris Luafowl is an athlete, right? Like 6'3" plus, or 6'2" and a half, 6'3", somewhere in that ballpark, long arms. He has, going back to high school, he played a lot in space in general. He's going to be a much better pass coverage player than a Drew White, just, you know, kind of apples for like who you're supplementing him in there, right? And then him going to Will is also going to allow maybe a JD Bertrand to move to Mike, where he's better suited to play in coverage as a Mike linebacker than a Will. And so I think overall it's going to improve tremendously from just the presence of a Maris Luafowl, because I think that he presents so much more coverage upside than, let's say, a Drew White. Although Drew wasn't a bad coverage linebacker, Maris is just a much higher upside player in that department. So I think just his presence is going to improve it tremendously.
Agreed.
Didn't you have a thought on that?
Well, I think if you also insert Jordan Botelho at times, he's just long and athletic as well, and that's just going to help your pass coverage that much more, right? It's just from a body type standpoint. How many times last year in a post-game show did we talk about the fact that, hey, you know, a lot of times they were in the right place, but they just don't have the length to make the play, and that's just biology, you know what I mean? And they've got a couple dudes who are long and lengthy, and they're going to be able to make some plays that some of the guys last year weren't able to make, regardless of whether they were in the right spot or not. So, yeah, I think it's definitely going to improve.
Detroit Hunter asks, how early is too early taking these commitments? My fear is we could end up with another situation like this year at running back.
That's an imperfect comparison, in my opinion, because last year we're talking about a completely different coaching staff, right? Like, I know it's the conversation on Cedric Irvin Jr. Cedric Irvin Jr. committed to Brian Kelly's staff, and then Marcus Freeman's staff unfortunately had to make a decision that they felt like was best for their program moving forward. If we're thinking in a year from now that Marcus Freeman's staff is going to be intact and he's still the head coach, that staff has already evaluated the talent, and they're the ones that are making these committable offers right now, right? And we already had a situation where, I'm not going to say any names, obviously we talked about it with the Irish Players Club, where there was a player that wanted to commit that Notre Dame was not ready to take their commitment, right? So they are going to take the offers for guys that they have evaluated and said, those guys are fits into our school. So I don't think, Detroit Hunter, that it's a comparable situation at all, because we're assuming that this staff is going to be the same one intact next year. So therefore, they are the ones that are evaluating right now as well, obviously.
I also think the last staff had and it really started with the head coach, had a mentality of, you know, well, this is a nice player, and, you know, it's better to have him than nobody. And I think it kind of stemmed from the fact that they weren't going to challenge for top guys. If you look at who the early commitments were for Marcus Freeman last year, right? If you look at situations like, I mean, who were the first few guys to commit on defense? It was Keon Keeley, it was Brennan Vernon,
right?
It was Drake Bowen and Peyton Bowen were the first 4 defensive commits, right? Those are different scenarios than taking Jack Nickel super early. And that's where I think D. Trollhunter you get into is you're spot on because you're looking at this holistically kind of going back a few years, but Ryan is also correct. And this is a different staff. And when you look at CJ Carr, I mean, he's a 5-star caliber kid. You know, Brandon Davis Swain just jumped up 161 spots in the latest Rivals rankings up to number 29. These aren't questionable takes. Even the only guy that I've looked at and kind of viewed as a questionable take, Owen Wafel, is simply because of how good the current class is. But, you know, he plays a position that they don't have a lot of guys on or we think projects there. You know, it's kind of 3 technique to nose tackle. But again, he's a top 250 kind of kid. You know, and so, you know, Jack Larson's ranked as the number 49 player in the country. Should Notre Dame get him today, it would make sense that he'd be a take because he's the number 49 player in the country.
Right, he's top 50 player.
You know, right. Cam Williams is committing next week to somebody. Notre Dame's in the running for that. He's a top 100 player, in my view. I think Rivals just bumped him up to like 104. So these are really good football players. Cedric Urban was never that. He was barely in the top 300 when he committed, barely in the top 250. And he was a nice player. And Cedric Irvin's still a good player. I mean, this isn't he's a better player than Jack Nickel is, in my opinion. It's just it was too early to take a kid at a position where you're going to take so few kids. You know, it's one thing to reach a little early on an offensive lineman because you can take 4 or 5. It's a little different at running back. So I think the staff is doing its due diligence to make sure that it is taking guys that they view as that. And Ryan is spot on that you know, if there's a question about a kid, you're going to honor it if he's a kid that you recruited and you landed. And that wasn't the case with Cedric Irvin Jr., in my view. Good question, D. Trollhunter. John A1 asks, it's often a talking point discussing top offenses average over 40 points per game, but how much do these offenses average versus top 10 to 15 teams? How should elite versus elite look? Can I address this one first, guys?
Oh, yeah, this is right up your alley.
I think this is the big thing that I've talked about is it's kind of like the 2019 offense, right? That was the most points Notre Dame has ever scored in a season. It was the highest point per game total of the last, like since the Charlie Weiss teams in 05 and 06. But it was a very misleading number because they scored like 66 against New Mexico, 59 against Bowling Green. They scored a bunch against like a bad Duke team, a bad BC team, but they scored 17 at Georgia. They scored 14 against Michigan. Like anytime they've played good teams, they have been in the teens. Like we were talking about Ohio State and games that Ohio State lost. It basically is when they lose games, they're sub 30. When Notre Dame loses games, they're sub 20. And sometimes sub 10, especially in real minutes. I mean, if we're being honest, Notre Dame hasn't scored over 10 points in a big game, like a postseason game, in moments where the game was in doubt. They didn't get to 14 points against Bama 2 years ago till the game was over and Bama had already subbed dudes out. You know, they didn't get to 10 points against Clemson until, even though the starting defense was still in on that Chris Tyree run, the game was no longer in doubt. It was like, 34-3, I think, something like 31-3, something like that. Same thing in the Bama game in 2012. I think Notre Dame didn't score their second touchdown until the game was already kind of a rout. And that's the problem, So you're not going to be a 40-point per game team. And we've often said, you've got to be careful not to look at the total number if it's coming because you're dominating the bad teams. But Notre Dame could score 14 points against Ohio State, 17 against Clemson, and still average 40 points this year. And it doesn't mean anything has changed because it really comes down to your point total is going to be high because you're scoring more in the bigger games. That's going to be the key. So when you get to a postseason game, I've talked about this. Teams that have won the national title game have averaged about 40 points per game in the postseason. In those championship games, teams that win first-round games tend to average almost 40 points a game. You have to be able to score. During the regular season, it's a little different. I feel like the postseason is different because you get a whole month to prepare. But, if you're going to play Clemson in the regular season, what are the odds that you're going to beat them 10-3? It's rare. And last year's game was a fluky situation with Georgia. Georgia, number one, doesn't have a great offense. Number two, Clemson's offense was a mess. If Clemson is traditional, you're not doing that to a Trevor Lawrence-led team. Right? Like keeping them down points-wise is kind of like what Ohio State did in 2019. They held them to 29, and Clemson didn't get to 29 till late in the game, right? It's what Notre Dame did. You hold them to 30. That's how you win those games. You got to be able to get to 30-plus in those big games. I don't think you need to score 40 all the time, especially with the defense as good as Notre Dame's. but you're not beating Ohio State with 20 to 24 points most likely. You're going to have to get to 30 plus, and that's the reality of it. So 40, 38 plus is kind of the margin for me. Get to 38 plus on your overall average, but that's got to include being in the 27 to 33 in your big games. That's really where you're going to have to be. All right. John A1 also says, now that the defense will be in its third different scheme in 3 years, do you think it's likely they will play faster and be more sound than they were in 2021? Vince, you want to go ahead and start off with that one?
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan, if you got something.
Well, I was just going to say, why are we assuming that they're going to be in a third different scheme? It's still going to be kind of schematic.
I mean, it's a third different defensive coordinator, but it's not really three different schemes. There's going to be some tweaks and some things of that nature, but I wouldn't call it three different schemes. I really wouldn't.
Right. I would say that
the terminology is not going to change. I'll say that. The terminology is not going to change, but it's going to look different, but it's still going to be a lot of the same stuff.
And they're still trying to recruit the same types of players.
It's a different emphasis is what it's going to look like.
That's fair. Right. That's fair, I guess. Yeah. But no, I don't think that they were slow last year. I don't think that they were unsound last year. I think there were some plays that they didn't make that they could have made. And I think most of the guys that didn't make plays last year are back. As far as just finishing some of those plays, I'm thinking in my head, some of those plays that weren't made at linebacker in the backfield, things like that. Those guys are all back. They're going to be better. And Marist is back and he's going to be healthy. And hopefully Jordan Botelho is going to be on the field. And I just feel like a lot of those things are going to be taken care of. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with who the defensive coordinator is. I think if it was Marcus Freeman as DC or Al Golden as DC, I think the defense takes a step in the right direction regardless. So will they be a little bit faster? Maybe because they're more used to what they're doing. Are they going to be more sound? Hopefully they make less mistakes, I guess. But I just don't – the correlation, I guess, is what is hanging up on me.
I think you're also just going to get faster in some spots, right? Like you mentioned Maris Loifeld, talk about Brandon Joseph. There's a couple newcomers that are just going to add a little influx of athleticism to their respective spots as well. And then, like you said, Vince, another year just of natural maturation. Guys are just going to be moving a little faster. And I definitely understand, John, I understand your point completely. It's for guys to play as fast as they possibly can, it's about a confidence thing, right? It's a comfort in what they're doing. I think, though, with Marcus Freeman still having, his imprint on the program, a lot of the stuff is going to still be similar. Can it look like, to Brian's point, a little differently because Al Golden's going to have his spin on it? Sure, but I don't think they're going to compromise completely what has been successful under Coach Freeman to go completely different, right? I think that we've talked about it before. Marcus Freeman brought Al Golden in because he thought that it could be, this is what we've done, put your spin on it, but this is still kind of our philosophy from a defensive perspective. So I think just natural maturation and then getting a couple newcomers, quote unquote, in there is going to be big for the team speed.
I want to say this too. I want to grant John's premise of third scheme in 3 years. Just grant the premise because I think there's a point that needs to be made. The difference between the transition between Freeman and Golden, if we're to accept the premise of the question, John, because I do think there's some merit to it because Al Golden's defense is going to look different than Marcus Freeman's. He's not inheriting the playbook and just, kind of like how there was really not much of a transition from Mike Elko to Clark Lee. Right, it was the same thing. This is going to be more of a more change than this transition than that one. Having said that, the reason, to your guys' point, the reason that Marcus Freeman brought in Al Golden was not to install a new philosophy. It was to take the philosophy that Marcus Freeman believes in and then run with it. Do your thing with it.
And that's what Coach Freeman was looking for.
Correct. That's different than what Marcus Freeman did when he took over for Clark Lee. Now, Coach Freeman gave lip service to the notion, and I think it was done out of respect for someone that you thought did a good job of, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're going to keep building on what – no, they didn't. They completely changed the way that Clark Lee ran defense, which I'm okay with because you got to do you, right? Like what Clark Lee does works, what Marcus Freeman does works. You got to do you, right? And so that transition was a lot different because that was a very structured, very detailed, this is what's going to happen. This is exactly what you do. Don't stray out of the framework of what we do. Where with Marcus Freeman's defense, there's a little bit more at some, hey, here's where I'm going to guide you to the ball, but at some point in time, you got to go make a play. And that's a different philosophy. And that was a big shift from 2020 to 2021. And that's why we did see some big plays be given up early, because guys did, they weren't quite as sound. And there were some mistakes that led to like the long run against Florida State, which was a big mistake. There was another long run against Toledo that was a partly player mistake, partly call mistake, because you had a new coach signaling in the wrong thing. He thought it meant one thing and it ended up being something different. Those things tend to happen. This is going to be different because all that stuff is going to be, the terminology is going to be the same. The philosophy is going to be the same. The go make a play is going to be the same. It's a different voice, and that voice is going to have a little bit of a different way of getting to that objective, coverage-wise, alignment-wise, things like that. But the philosophy won't change. And that's why I think the transition will be smooth, and why I think this defense will still be able to play very fast. And the other reason, how else you can play fast, guys, is when you have a lot of fast players.
Exactly.
And Notre Dame has a lot of fast players on defense, in my opinion. TB12 for Heisman, in your opinion, is the dream of the number one class in 2023 still alive?
Yes, but it gets a lot more difficult if they're not able to get a top quarterback in the class, in my opinion. That's really where it comes to.
Let me ask you a question, Ron. Are you referring to the points-based top class, or a more the right way to look at a top class? That, because I think those are two different. Because I agree with you on one point. The other part, it doesn't matter if they get a quarterback or not. If it's just the points-based system, if they don't get Dante Moore, but they get some guy we're not thinking they're going to get, who's a similarly ranked player, it doesn't matter. In
like
a points-based system,
Caleb Downs or something
Samuel
like that.
Samuel Mpemba, right?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Now, if we're going to talk about what you and I and Vince would think is a number one ranked class, where we do put more emphasis on filling needs and important positions, then it makes it harder. If you don't have a quarterback, period, I do think it makes it harder. In a more subjective, proper way of doing a rankings class, I would say yes. But in the points-based system, Ryan, I would still say it's possible.
Yeah.
The bigger thing with if you're not going to get Dante Moore, and look, just let it play out. We're not going to talk a lot about it. Let it play out. And once a decision is made one way or the other, I'll have a lot to say on the message board, because there's a lot to this. There's a reason I have made this topic sort of off limits for us. I'll explain all that when a decision is made. But just let it play out. But I think the bigger issue isn't that they don't get a quarterback in the points-based system. It's that that's a top 10 player that would have gotten you a lot of points if you were to get him.
Exactly.
So we'll have a lot more to say about that. But yes, when you still have the receivers on the board that are on the board for them, when you still have Charles Jagus on the board, when you still have Jason Moore, Jaden Alsbury, Caleb Downs, who, we've never really thought they had a great shot at, but you've got Micah Bell, top 100 guy, Christian Gray, top 100 guy. There's a lot of highly ranked guys on the board. So yes, that number one class is still very much, the hopes are alive. But the key is not so much focusing on number one. You've got to be in that top three in both categories, the points-based and the subjective one. You have to be in that top three class, in my opinion. Ryan, here's one for you. It's a recruiting question from James Burlingham. What are the chances at Sammy Brown and Ryan Wingo? I love Brown's mullet. We need him badly. So, Ryan, you can comment on that, but I just a little bit more of you have had a chance to speak with Sammy and people close to Ryan Wingo. So just kind of give an update on how those two visits went. James also asked if they have a legitimate shot at Sammy Brown. So can you just kind of talk about the odds, but then also just kind of update people on how the visit went for those two players yesterday?
Absolutely. Yeah. So people that don't know, Sammy Brown is a linebacker out of Georgia. He is a near consensus top 20 player in the 2024 cycle, ranked as high as top 5.
Mullet game is on point.
He's got a great mullet, man. It's a great mullet. It really is. He's a fantastic player, and he's spoke highly of Notre Dame in the past. They've been on him for a while. He wasn't a pot of gold guy. He's had an offer for a long time from Notre Dame now. So he's been a guy that's been on the board, speaks highly. First visit he got up to Notre Dame. He's on they're actually, him and Wingo are both on the Midwest swing a little bit. They're going to be both at Michigan and Michigan State over the next couple of days as well. So everything that Sammy told me, he got to spend a lot of time with James Laurinaitis, which he was very complimentary of. He got to spend some time with Al Golden, which he was very complimentary of. He said he loved it. It was a great time. He had a tremendous time. He said that he would definitely at some point come back again. Like he really had that big of an impact on him. So I think he had a great time overall. He said the only thing was he wasn't really able to check out the stadium as much because there's a concert apparently today that a big concert. Do you know
Billy Joel, man?
Billy Joel,
a big concert. Heck yeah, concert.
I forgot who it was for a second. I'm sorry. I know Billy Joel.
People in their 20s are like, who?
No. Everyone knows Billy Joel. Everybody knows.
They
Piano
better.
Man.
They better.
Yeah, everybody knows Billy
That's
Joel.
a banning
Anyway.
offense. That's a timeout offense in the chat.
Even if you only know him as Christy Brinkley's ex-husband, that's still worthy of knowing who Billy Joel is.
I don't even think I knew that part. I'll be honest
Yeah,
with you.
I didn't know that part.
Hey,
either.
look, man, I'm all about the music. I'm
Get
about the
out.
music.
Get out.
I'm about the music.
He's
So
an
anyway,
artist.
Ryan, back to the
Yes.
update.
He's an
Sorry,
artist.
Billy Joel distraction.
So yes. So they're in a good spot with Sammy Brown. Obviously, this one's like he's a 5-star caliber kid out of the state of Georgia, right? So it's going to be a tough one. Like, let's be honest about it, but very good first impression. Getting him back on campus, I think, is going to be huge if they're able to get him for a game visit this season. But they're in the conversation, which is anything that you want to be there with, right? Ryan Wingo, I feel good about where they are with Ryan Wingo. I'll be very honest. He's been to Notre Dame before, wasn't supposed to come back this summer or this spring. I talked to someone close to him a few weeks ago, and he said that he wasn't expecting to go back because he had already seen Notre Dame. He wanted to see other places that he had not seen yet, but he made the trip, went back. He's been multiple times Notre Dame. I spoke to his coach a few weeks ago, and I will say Ryan Wingo is 100% a Notre Dame fit. That kid is well-spoken, respectful, high academic kid. He would be a great fit at Notre Dame. Again, he's ranked as like the number 3 player on 3 in the nation, right? So he's a top of the board type of dude. Notre Dame is making a push. They've had him on campus a couple times, though. I think during the conversation, it's going to be another one where everyone's going to be after him, but Notre Dame put themselves, I think, in continue good spot. He had a really nice visit, and his family was there with him as well, his mom and his dad, and they both enjoyed the trip as well.
I want to answer a question that people have here real quick about Jadarian Price. Salty Virginia Peanuts asks, will Price receive a medical redshirt? And if so, does this open up a scholarship to ease the numbers crunch? So in college football, a medical scholarship is different than a medical redshirt. If you are put on medical scholarship, you can no longer play football.
Done.
Your football career at that institution is over. Now, you can transfer somewhere else, and if they clear you, you can play somewhere else, but you cannot play at that school anymore. You can't just put kids on and off of medical hardships is what it's called. A medical red shirt has more to do with just your season of eligibility is not lost because you couldn't play. Right. You played 4 or less games. So there's a different situation. So will he receive a medical red shirt? Yes, he will. It won't likely matter because I don't think he's necessarily a 5-year running back anyway, but he could be now. So he doesn't lose a year of eligibility. And what I would like to see happen is I wish the NCAA with this open portal thing, there's still hundreds of players in the portal without homes.
Oh, yeah.
What I wish there was a window in July leading up to fall camp, and it would end when fall camp starts, but like sometime in the month of July, where if you have a player that sustains a season-ending injury in the spring or summer, in that you could put him sort of on a medical scholarship where it's kind of like the way the injured reserve used to be, Ryan, where when a guy's on injured reserve, and there used to be a time where once a guy went on injured reserve, he was kind of out for the year. You know, that's changed a little bit, I believe. You correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I don't follow the NFL as much, but
I think you could put a player on the injured reserve, and they come. I think there's one they return after week 8, I think, and then there's one, and then there's another where they're out for the whole season, if I remember correctly, or something like that. Yeah.
So if a guy has an injury that you know he's done for the year, especially the regular season, that you could then create a situation where you declare that so he can't play, but it takes his scholarship number away from you that you could then go get a kid who's in the portal that is looking for home. I think that would be smart of the NCAA to do. Now, again, you'd have to create the rule to where a guy you can't come back. If you heal faster, once you make this move, the guy can't come back. So with some injuries, you're not like with Logan Diggs, you wouldn't do that because you do think he can come back. If a guy tore his ACL in March, you may not want to do that because guys are coming back from that so much quicker now. If Jadarian Price injured himself in January, you may not want to do that because there'd be more time. But when you get hurt in June, with again, Notre Dame is the one saying this as well. An Achilles injury is kind of like the old ACL. It's kind of a year-long thing, to really get back to speed. He's out. That there'd be something where they could kind of find relief from a scholarship standpoint in order to go into the portal and get a kid who's out there. I think that would be good for teams, and I think that'd be good for kids who are sitting there stuck without a place to go because Notre Dame's not going to be the only school that's lost. BC just lost a starting offensive line. They're only returning starting offensive lineman to a torn ACL. Was it last week, Ryan? Or was it earlier this week?
It was last week. Yep.
Christian Mahogany tore his ACL. He's out for the year. It'd be really nice if BC could go say, hey, look, he's out. We're not to fall camp yet. Let's go to the portal, see if there's anybody that fits what we're looking for. I wouldn't mind seeing that. It's one of those things that has to be done. If you're going to have the automatic transfer thing, it's one of those things, in my opinion, that has to be done to help with roster management. I don't know what you guys think about that.
That's interesting. I never even thought about it.
That hasn't even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
It better, though, since I'm going to be the next baseball head coach. I'm going to have to start thinking about that kind of
stuff. Don't worry, Vince. You're a baseball coach at Notre Dame. You can't get kids in the transfer portal anyway, so it doesn't matter.
That's true. That's a good point. Another good point.
I just love how he nonchalantly said that. That was hilarious. Tyler Evans, this is an interesting one, Ryan. What state would you like to recruit kids from more?
New Jersey.
Okay.
I'm just kidding, actually. I think that's already started.
Not bad though. Yeah,
New Jersey's.
They're pretty recruited. They already recruited pretty well.
Yeah, they're pretty active in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Did you say like Arizona is like a big hotbed right now for kids? Or
it's getting better. Yeah, it's getting a lot better. I would say Texas is the big one, and they're doing it more this cycle already. So I think Notre Dame's already taken that one into action, honestly, Tyler. I think the hotbeds that we're talking about are Florida, Texas, and California, right? Like those are the three main states. And then there's a lot of really good states like New Jersey that we just mentioned there, obviously Georgia and those types of schools that are obviously, states that are great as well. But I would say Texas is the big one for me. They already have, what do they have? 2 right now from the state of Texas with possibility of 3 with Micah Bell.
Yeah. Peyton Bowen and Braylon James, right?
And then you're in the running for Micah Bell. You're in the running for Jaden Greathouse. So you have a chance to have a really nice cycle in Texas. And that's one of those states where it's not like there's not going to be huge up and down swings as far as like, wow, Texas is down with talent next year. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those states that it's just always consistently like if you get a couple really good players out of the state of Texas, it's just going to be a consistent thing every year. So I'd say getting in the Lone Star State consistently is a big one for me because for a while, again, the previous 5 cycles before this, they'd only signed 3 players in 5 years. So I think that getting tapped into that hotbed is a big thing for Notre Dame, in my opinion.
Yeah, a year ago, Ryan, I would have agreed with you completely. I think they're already doing that. I think the Southwest in general is an area that Notre Dame can and should have more success in. So with them now recruiting Texas, is there another state? I mean, I'd still like to see them really hammer the Virginia, North Carolina area even more. I really think there's areas where they could get into there.
Like the DMV.
Yeah. Very much so.
I hate
very much so.
Just sit there and you have to wait.
Different DMV. Which is kind of true if you ever been on a highway around one of the big cities in that area.
I have not. I'm a not well-traveled human. So.
Man. Oh, the Beltway.
It's pretty terrible.
I hate the Beltway.
Pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Got a super chat from Michael Brahoni with the Price injury. Do you think that this will make Freeman and company to ramp up the Richard Young recruiting? I know it's a long shot. I'm going to take this one real quick, guys. The two really don't have a lot to do with each other. Even if it's a year-long injury, he's going to be back next year. I think there's a question about, are you better year 1 or year 2 post Achilles? That's a legitimate conversation, but I don't think this doesn't increase their need or desire to get Richard Young. They already wanted Richard Young. As much as you possibly could. I don't think this is an injury that's going to really keep him from being a good player next year. Again, Achilles are tricky. I understand that any injury is a little tricky. But my point is, I just don't see this one being, Ryan, as being a situation where this necessarily needs to cause Notre Dame to change their plans of taking a second back because they already planned on taking a second back, maybe 3 in this class.
My mind went more towards the immediacy of it. I was thinking in my mind, like, I mean, if Richard Young can reclassify to 2022, that'd be fantastic. Sure, why not? But otherwise, I mean, if he's a 2023 anyway, so at that point, Jadarian Price in theory will be back healthy from his injury. And I know Achilles have gotten, they're scary at points, but I think at, 18, 19 years old, whatever Jadarian is right now, it's not, if he was of a higher age, I would have a lot more hesitancy on how strong he'll come back, but I'm not really worried about Jadarian Price coming back from this lone injury. I think he'll come back strong and he'll be a great player for Notre Dame.
Jeff Fluke with an interesting question, Ryan. Will the hype around the team help improve the game day atmosphere?
I'm as far as what I guess is my.
I think just the excitement, the buzz, the crowd noise, the energy in the stadium, all that kind of stuff. I think it
I would
will.
hope so. Yeah. I don't see
but
why
that only
not.
lasts so long. I mean,
Right.
if you come out and you're 8-4, 9-3, that buzz is gone. I mean, you got to keep winning, right?
Got to win
that's
football
the key.
games.
But yes, I do believe there will be an early. But you know what the best thing for that is? Winning and playing a better schedule than they've played in recent years.
Just win, baby.
That's the big thing. It's not even just winning, Vince. I mean, you're around here, you know it. There's a different energy in this town, and I'm saying this to you, Vince, because you've been here since the 80s, especially the 90s when you were a little older.
Sure,
you can remember the energy of 93 when Florida State came to town. I mean, it's palpable around the whole city.
Yes.
That's where COVID was a bummer for a million reasons, but that was one of the things about the Clemson game, because so much of the town was like the people just weren't going out. So like you couldn't feel that same buzz, but had that been a normal situation, that would create similar thing. The Ohio State game will be like that next year. But yeah, when there's a big opponent coming to town, and with all due respect, I don't care if Cincinnati was ranked number 1, that's not a big opponent.
It wasn't
from that perspective.
Nope. Agreed.
So USC was that way when they're good as well.
Yeah.
And when Notre Dame, I mean, it helps when Notre Dame is good. Don't get me wrong. Like when they're competitive and they're playing for something, especially when you get into like October, late October, early November, if they're still in contention for something, it's palpable, man. And you talked about the COVID year. That was the worst year ever going to games, because my favorite part about going to games is walking up to the stadium and just taking in the whole atmosphere and just feeling, especially in October, leaves are turning. It's the fall. It's football season. It's not 100 degrees outside. And you hear music playing from the dorms, and you can smell the brats cooking. And I mean, the walk to the stadium is by far the best part of that day. And in COVID, it was like it was in the middle of May or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It
felt more like a spring game.
Yeah. It was like we were going to watch practice. You know what I mean? Oh, there just so happens to be something going on in the stadium. But the atmosphere was horrible. It was horrible. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it was. I went to the Cincinnati game last year, and it was a little demoralizing, to be honest, man. Like, you went in there and it was just like red everywhere. I'm just like, what is happening right now? And I know Notre Dame wasn't a great football team. Like, there was flaws, obviously, but they were undefeated going into that game. Like, it was a huge game,
right?
And Cincinnati basically took over that stadium. It was the
part of it though, and I think this is where Jeff's question comes from, is I think a lot of that had to do with, I think it was year 12 of Brian Kelly, and it was just kind of like whatever. We know what to expect, and everybody's waiting on a shoe to drop. That's what do you think the phrase BK PTSD came from? Right? It was sort of like, this is what we've come to expect after 12 years, and we know we're going to be good, but we know we're also going to lose every big game we play in, right? Basically, it's kind of the thought a lot. I mean, Vince, that you and I live around here, we hear it, right? I mean, that was always even people that liked Brian Kelly, they would then justify why it was okay to lose those games, but they still expected to lose those games.
Yes, no question.
And that was the big key to that whole thing. So I do think as long as Marcus Freeman can win and get some early career big wins, and he's going to have plenty of opportunities this year.
He is.
I think that's going to be important, and there just weren't enough of those. That's really where a lot of the excitement comes from. It's a rivalry game, but the other thing too is like Notre Dame USC rivalry is different than like Ohio State, Michigan, Duke, North Carolina, Alabama, Auburn, because those are all such regional rivalries. The fans just are like kind of always there. That's not really true for Notre Dame USC. I mean, there's a lot of Notre Dame fans out west. There's not exactly a lot of USC fans around here. And so I think what that does is that means that it has to be a better matchup. So I think USC getting good again is also good for Notre Dame, in my opinion.
And the ACC getting better. I mean, if the ACC as a whole would get better, that only benefits Notre Dame. I mean, let's be honest. You're locked into 5 games with them. And if Clemson's not on the schedule, and apparently, sometimes North Carolina, and there's a couple of outliers, but if you're not hitting the lottery by getting Clemson on the schedule, the ACC schedule doesn't help Notre Dame. Plain and simple.
I'm just glad that there's not many USC fans around here. You can keep them all over there. You can take all the Michigan fans, all the USC fans, put them on the deserted islands, and ship them off. I'm good.
All righty. Here's a good one. Michael Keeley. Ryan, I'll ask this one of you because I think you've studied this a little bit more. Vince, if you have an opinion, you can follow up. Is the Jim Knowles hype overrated? Statistically, last year was his best year, if I'm not mistaken. Could you look up how his defense is finished by year and make an assessment? So we have done that, by the way. We have done this in plenty of conversations. But Ryan, I'll let you kind of take a shot at this. Vince, if you have something you want to follow up with, go for it. But I'll have some thoughts at the end of the of this part of the question as well.
I don't think he's. I mean, all right. So I guess we start out with: is the Jim Knowles hype overrated? As a savior of the team for 2022, yes. As
maybe,
like a quick turnaround, yeah, sure, I can get there. Overall, though, Jim Knowles is a really good defensive coach. He really is.
Mm-hmm.
His scheme is very fast moving, a little complicated. There's a lot to it, but I think he's a really smart guy, and it's taken his teams at times some time to get acclimated to it. But when they do, it turns around pretty quickly, and he gets a lot out of the players he has. Because if you look at that Oklahoma State team last year, there's not a lot of individual talent on that team. Like the Rodriguez kid, the linebacker was a good player. Jared Converse that transferred to LSU is a good player. Yeah. But none of them
wasn't winning with a lot of first and second round picks, is Ryan's point. Like really good college football players, but not like elite talents where you're like, oh, wow.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So it's not a lot of elite talent, but the system gets the best out of them, right? So I think Jim Knowles is a really good coach. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for it to get acclimated to Ohio State, but I think long term it's going to be a really good hire for them. But if you're thinking that Jim Knowles is going to come in there and it's going to flip the script day one with Ohio State, I don't see that happening personally.
Vince, you have any thoughts that you want to add to what Ryan just said before I roll on it?
Well, I mean, very basic as far as I like his scheme. I do like his scheme. I think he gets the most out of his players. I was just looking at his resume and where he's come from. You know, Cornell. I mean, he was a coach at Cornell as an assistant and as a head coach. So he's used to dealing with smart players. And I think that has a lot to do with the way he runs his scheme. And so that would, I don't know if worry is the right term to use, you know, going into big boy college football at Ohio State. But at the same time, I think he's going to have to adjust a few things in order to be as successful as people want him to be. I don't think it's going to be an overnight thing, but I think he's a very, very good defensive coach. He's been a defensive coordinator for a really, really long time, and he's had a lot of success.
For me, guys, it depends on how he implements his style. Because one thing I've talked about is if you actually, first of all, I think Jim Knowles, big picture, is a very good defensive coach. He had Duke rolling about as well as Duke can roll defensively without the Jimmies and Joes. Because defense more than offense is about, do you have dudes?
Absolutely.
And he recruited second. I mean, Ryan, there was a time during his tenure where Duke had legitimate multiple NFL players, caliber play. I mean, not like first round picks, but like legitimate NFL caliber players in the secondary. A couple of them had some injury issues that kept them, but they had some legit athletes on the back end that he played a big role in recruiting and developing. But the one thing you look at when his tenure is his first year at Duke and his first year at Oklahoma State, both, they gave up more yards per play and more points per game than they did the year before for the coach that was fired. And the reason goes to what Ryan said, which is it is a very complex system.
Right.
And he has been one of those guys that at the places he's gone has been very much we're going to implement this defense and I know it's going to take time. Having said that, I won't be shocked if Jim Knowles looks at this 2022 Ohio State team and says, okay, we got a chance to play for a championship, right? Like, we're going to do a little bit more of a slower transition of my system because I got to make sure I'm getting the most out of this group.
Sure. Because
I've got we got a really good team. We got a dynamic offense. We've got a chance if we can just be solid on defense to get this thing turned around. Because he's never, let's be honest too, it just depends on his attitude about it. Because if he looks at this the same way he did the Duke and the Oklahoma State, Ohio State's not going to be much better on defense this year. Next year, they'll start getting better. And by year 3, they're going to be really good, right? Mm-hmm. In my opinion, assuming Ryan Day doesn't become the same kind of roadblock to success on defense the way that Lincoln Riley is. I don't think he will, because if you look at the 1 year that Ryan Day and Jeff Hafley worked together, Ohio State had a really good defense. Really good defense. So when I look at it, guys, it just depends on, does he approach Ohio State differently because of the talent he's inheriting compared to what he did at Oklahoma State and Duke? If he does, then I think he'll make an even bigger early on transition. It just may take him a while to kind of do things his way. I think that's going to be the big key for me. But yes, he's a very good defensive coordinator. It's just his approach has caused the transitions to be slower. It took him really 3 years because we started seeing it a little bit in 2020, Ryan. We started to see Oklahoma State start to take a step in 2020. They had some flashes, and then 2021, bam, kicked the doors down with a very experienced team for the most part. I mean, like Colin Martin came in. He was a freshman. He had a couple other young guys, but for the most part, that was a very veteran team.
Colin Oliver.
Colin
You
Oliver.
You combine Brock Martin.
Yeah. They were a pretty dynamic duo.
That sounds like a good player, man. That sounds like a really good player.
Yes. But he was the freshman, but for the most part, they were juniors and seniors, a lot of those guys. So it just depends on what he wants to do. But no, I don't think the hype is overrated if we're talking realistic, what the expectations are long term. I think to your point, people are acting like he's going to turn this into a vintage Ohio State defense in year one. And I think people like that are overestimating. I think the hype has more to do, the overrated hype has more to do with Ohio State's talent. I think people have overrated Ohio State's talent, especially at linebacker and in the secondary.
Yeah.
I actually think they have really good talent up front. It just hasn't been utilized. But the guy that has underutilized that talent last couple of years is still there.
Yeah.
And Larry Johnson. I don't think this is not a secondary like they had in 2015 where future first round picks were coming off the bench.
Everywhere.
Right? Like this isn't the Eli Apple, Jerry Conley, Von Bell,
Denzel Ward.
I mean, this isn't that group. They don't have that kind of talent in the secondary. Will they get back to that? Maybe, but that's just not who this group is. They don't have a Baron Browning at linebacker, or Pete Werner at linebacker. I mean, they're trotting out Cody Simon and
Steel Chambers
and Tommy Eichenberg and the kid that just transferred from Arizona State, the Ohio kid that just transferred from Arizona State.
That was the running back over there.
Yeah,
right?
he was running back. He's going to move to linebacker there. I mean, they just don't have the same talent level. So I think that's going to be something too that people need to understand. Where if he isn't able to turn this into like the 2019 unit, I mean, you look like the Jeff Hafley we were talking about, right? I mean, go look at who they had on that football team in 2019. I'm sorry, that group doesn't exist on the current roster at Ohio State. I mean, let's just kind of go through some of these names, guys. There's a guy named defensive end named Chase Young. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him. Ryan, I know you cover the NFL draft, but he may not have been a big name. I think he was only picked number 2 overall. I think only. You had, as you said, Jeff Okudah, Baron Browning. Jeff Okudah was number 4 overall pick. Baron Browning was a 3rd round pick. Pete Werner was on that football team. Jordan Fuller is currently a starter for the Rams, correct?
Good player.
Malik Harrison, very underrated player in college for them. Damon Arnett, head case, but a 1st round draft pick. I mean, Sean Wade, very talented player on that football team. I mean, they had some guys on that football team, guys. I mean, they had some dudes on that team. And so, that team's going to be better. And they just don't have that level of talent right now, in my opinion, especially on the back end and at linebacker. But linebacker is going to change quicker than the secondary because they do have some freshmen that are dudes that I think, CJ Hicks. I mean, especially CJ Hicks. I really like CJ Hicks. Yeah. Powers, I like. I think a couple of their linebackers were a little overrated, to be honest with you. But I love Sonny Styles' projection as a linebacker. I think it may take him a little extra time because he should have been in high school this year, to be completely honest with you. I think he should have waited. I'm not a big fan of reclassifying, and we'll talk more about that as the summer goes on. But I love CJ Hicks. I thought he was an excellent player. I think Gabe Powers is overrated, but overrated doesn't mean I don't think he's good. I think he's very good. I just don't think he was like the 5-star, top 50 guy that some people made him out to be. But it was a very good group nonetheless. And then of course they lost the McCullough kid at one point in time.
I wonder where they're playing Sonny in their defense, because apparently, Brian, I heard that they're playing the Hickman kid that was their safety last year was probably their best player. Apparently he's playing like their whatever they call their
bullet or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Archer's in here, the Ohio State fan. I think they call it bullet, but I could be wrong on that. Archer could maybe clear that up for us. Vince, if you see that down there when it pops up, because you're scrolling the bottom, but it's kind of like a rover position, and I think that's where that's where they were selling Sonny he would play. And I think that's perfect for him because he's long. He's a little, to me, almost a little too long to be an inside linebacker. I worry about him getting chopped. He's 6'5". But he's so rangy and athletic and fluid and smooth that I could see him being that kind of guy. I think, to me, he's either going to be a rover or outgrow that and be an end. I think that's kind of how I see Sonny Styles, right? Like, just because of his frame, if he's big enough to be a Mike, then I just say put him on the edge and let him rush the quarterback. Otherwise, I'd let him, I'd kind of treat him very similar that I would treat the rover at Notre Dame, right? Jalen Sneed. It's like, give him a shot at rover, but if he can't, then you start moving him inside is now what I think that they should do. So, yeah. All right, let's get down to here. Some more questions, guys. We got a lot of them in today. Justin Carlson on Monday, someone asked a question about the upcoming NCAA game. That's for EA Sports. If IB were to have a tournament on the new NCAA game and couldn't use Notre Dame, who would you guys pick?
So this is just using 2022 teams, correct?
Going into 2023, right? Right. You can't use Notre Dame. Who would you pick?
Like, if we were playing the old one, I knew who I would pick. See, this is tough for me.
It's not in my mind. I'm projecting on who should be good in 2023. Who's going to be the quarterback that year? Let me think.
See, I would pick a team like Ohio State because they're gonna inflate those numbers, and they're gonna have all kinds of skill guys all over the place, and they're gonna have a really good running back. And in those games, it's all about the offense. So I will take Ohio State.
Do you have one, Brian? I'm still pondering.
I'd probably go Texas, just because, again, it's about how I like to use the game. I was always a guy that liked to throw the ball. And, so going into 2023, I'll have Quinn Ewers, who's going to be super overrated on the game. And on the game, I don't have to deal with him being a head case, right? Like, if I'm just going off of what his ratings are going to be on the game, give me that. I'll still have Jarrell Worthy, I think that's probably where, because the style of play, because the playbook and lots of receivers, that's probably where I would go. It would be that direction. But again, to me, the way I did it back in the days, I would create my own playbook, so it didn't matter who I used. I was going to run my offense. But
I was creating players. So what I used.
I think I'm picking Alabama. Because I'll have probably the what's that kid's name? Milroy or whatever his name is. The younger quarterback. Yeah. He's a really nice athlete. So I run the triple option with Alabama. Let's do it.
With the triple option, huh? So you're an option guy in
triple option. Oh man, it's fantastic.
If you know how to do it, it's fun.
Oh yeah.
Just saying. Yeah, we know.
You guys are both making me want to hurl
against you just to do it.
Yeah, it's like excuse me. Sorry about that, everybody. Jordan Schreiber also kind of follows up on this. Is Styles going to play the same position as Avery Davis? Talking about Lorenzo Styles. Any indication if Stuckey and Reese are going to be willing to play Merriweather and Colsey in a tight rotation? Jordan, I would advise you to listen to the show we did the other day on receiver that Ryan and I did. We dive into that much, much deeper. I'll just quickly answer your question. Yes, I think they will be willing to play the freshman. Yes, Lorenzo Styles does play the same position as Avery Davis. At times, he also plays X and will play some W. But I want to just bring this up just to refer you back to the show that we did a couple days ago that Ryan and I did. We dove much deeper into this than we would be able to do justice to the conversation in the show today. Jordan also says, I really hope Barnes wins the other cornerback job. I love seeing him lay players out. I also hope Mickey is the rotation guy and Lewis has moved to nickel or safety. Is this a real possibility? Ryan, you want to take a shot at this one? Vince, you want to take a shot at this one, this first part, because I know you absolutely love Ryan.
I do love Ryan Barnes, and I would not be upset if he won the other corner job at all. And yes, he can hit, but he's also long and athletic, and he's going to make plays, and I do like him over there. As far as Mickey's the rotation guy and Lewis has moved to nickel or safety, I don't know that he's going to be moving to safety. It's possible. We talked about that a little bit last year, but I think the safety depth has gotten better since then. So I don't know that that's the move that they're necessarily going to make. I think it's corner or bust for him, for Lewis. And I mean, based on everything that we're hearing out of the coaching staff and everybody else that's over there, they love Jaden Mickey. He's going to get time. He's going to play. Now, what that rotation looks like, that remains to be seen, but he's going to play. So, I would be fine with him being with Barnes being the other corner and having Mickey and Lewis be rotation guys, nickel guys. I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, Mickey's going to play. Just to reemphasize what Ben said, if Ryan Barnes takes the onus on himself, and he is the unquestioned best corner opposite of Cam Hart. I think that gives your team the best possible outcome in the secondary. I don't think that they'll move Clarence Lewis, but Brian, we've talked about this a ton in the past. I would love to see Clarence Lewis play some snaps at nickel. I really would. I think that he would be really good in that role because he's tough, he's physical, he's pretty sticky and short. You know, when he's working short to intermediate, it's just the long speed that gives you a little bit of concern, right? So I think in that role he could be a really good football player. But I think that they're going to keep him at outside corner because he started for 2 years, right? Like he's had a lot of experience in that role. So.
Next question from Jordan says, are you hearing that Lugg is probably going to start the guard position with Patterson this year when both leave after the season? Who do you see as the front runners on this for the starting guards next year? We've reported that multiple times that we expect that to happen, so we don't need to address the first part. Yes, we've heard it so much that we've talked about it. We've heard it from ourselves. When both leave after the season, and this is the part I want you guys to address, Ryan or Vince, we'll start with you. Because Lugg and Patterson are both out of eligibility after this year.
Yes.
So when they leave, who do you see as the guys that will be the front runners, so to speak? So if you had to pick, 2 guys to start at those 2 guard spots next year, who would your prediction be? I'll go Vince, start with you, and then Ryan will go with you.
I will go with Schrouth and Kristofic as
okay.
leaders in the clubhouse.
Okay.
Interesting. See, I'm going to go a little different. I'm actually going to say Rocco Spindler for one. And I'm going to say Billy Schrouth for the other.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Because I don't know if they would bring Kristofic back for a 5th year to start for a year. Although technically he could probably get a 6th year out of it. But I kind of think it – because Rocco was already challenging this Kristofic this spring. And I think another year under his belt, I think he transitions to that. And I think Billy Schrouth is just –
Yeah, Rocco will be my third one. I was disappointed in the way Rocco looked this spring. To be honest,
early on he looked dumpy,
yeah.
But he was playing much better by the end of the spring. I thought he looked good in the blue gold game. He's also still several years behind Andrew Kristofic. He's got a ways to go. True. I think the other part of it for me too, Vince, is I like Andrew Kristofic a lot. Ryan, I know you're also very high on Andrew Kristofic. It's about the age thing. There comes a point in time as a coach that you got to decide, okay, am I going to want to go 3 years in a row of finding a new starting guard if it's close? As opposed to just say, hey, let's roll with the younger guys who may be a bit more talented, perhaps. So I think that battle will rage. So I think those are the 3 candidates for me.
Yes, absolutely.
But I could see Rocco winning that job. But you're going to have an idea by the end of the year because those guys will have shown themselves. I think Rocco's a certainty for me. I think the bigger question is not Rocco. I think the bigger question for me would be Billy Schrouth. Because here's the deal. Billy Schrouth is the highest rated guard of the group. You guys know I was very high on Billy Schrouth. Definitely graded him out higher than Rocco, but kid hasn't played a snap of college football yet, even in a practice because of the injury. We have a lot we got to see from him. He's going to be a year behind Rocco. So if Kristofic comes back, I think Schrouth would then be behind Kristofic battling him, and then Rocco would be at the other spot. So I think what they would probably do going into the spring, if Kristofic's on the team, is have Kristofic and Rocco be the top 2 guards, and then Schrouth is kind of pushing one of them. He may start. I'd start him behind Kristofic. If he beats Kristofic out, then you're good. If he doesn't beat Kristofic out, but Kristofic's playing better than Rocco, you could always consider moving him to the other spot. That's the thing, is there's some interchangeableness there. Where basically you're going to get to play your best 2 guards. But I would probably lean towards coming out of the season. Maybe it's Kristofic and Rocco, but give Billy Schrouth a fall on the scout team and then a spring. And he may be tough to keep out of the lineup, in my opinion. That would be my 2 cents on that one. Good answers, guys.
I think the better question is who's the center, honestly.
Well, that's going to be Zeke Correll.
Zeke will be back.
Technically, Zeke has 2 years left.
Does he have 2 years left?
Because I'm pretty sure because of COVID. I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
you're probably right now that I think about it. Yeah. Yep.
So I think he had a regular red shirt. So because he didn't play in 2019. And in 2020 didn't count, so he was technically a redshirt freshman this year, which is
crazy.
Insane.
That's insane.
Yeah,
it's insanity. I agree.
Yeah, but that's the weird thing. So technically, Zeke has 2 years left, right? I'm doing this correct, right? 2019 he redshirted, so he would have gone into 2020 as a redshirt freshman, right? And he played in 2020, but that year doesn't count,
right?
So 2021,
freshman
he's
year.
technically in his second year of eligibility. He didn't play in his first year, so he'd be a redshirt freshman. So now he's a redshirt sophomore. So technically, he'd have 2 years after this.
That's
right?
crazy.
He could end up still being a 3-year starter at center.
Yeah.
As a class of 2019 signee. I believe I got that correct.
I think you
So if Zeke plays well, Ryan, obviously, now that we've talked that through, if Zeke plays well, we know who the starting center is going to be. I do think there's a good question about who is next, because if Zeke's the player we think he can be, I don't think he comes back for a 6th year.
Good
right?
point.
With his injury history, if he's a dominant player and maybe the NFL comes calling, he leaves and he's a day 2 pick maybe. I think there is a chance because of his size that he never gets enough love from the NFL to leave and could end up being a 3-year starter.
It's very possible.
We'll see how it plays out. Matt Sokolowski, happy Friday, IB Nation. Can y'all wish my brother Andrew a happy birthday? He's turning 26 today.
26.
Yes, we can absolutely do that. And I think Andrew is also recently married.
Ooh,
so engaged a little bit with Andrew on Facebook today. But yes, it is his 26th birthday. So definitely a happy, very, very happy birthday. I know Andrew got some very good news earlier today as well that also made his birthday even better. So definitely happy birthday for you.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, definitely happy birthday for you, Matt, or for Andrew. And Matt, that's being a good brother right there. Trying to get your brother some love on his birthday. Appreciate that very much. We have brothers we have multiple brothers on here because, like, here's the next one. Gabe Weiss, Gabe's brother Benjamin is also on our show. So we have all. That's why he goes by the Best Weiss brother. If you guys remember that nickname, this is the other one. This is the more humble one right here. Gabe is the more humble one. He says, could you talk a bit about Emil Wagner's recruitment and how the outcome was so unexpected? Did he purposely mislead reporters? I'll just quickly address this one, guys, because, Ryan, this is before you took over.
Yep.
He didn't mislead anyone. I just think he changed his mind late, because everybody – I didn't even watch his announcement. We were told Notre Dame thought he was picking Kentucky. It wasn't until, like, the very end. I just think he kind of sat down, and when it came down to it, Notre Dame was just too good to pass up. I really think that's it, because he was a kid whose family is stressed academics and all this. He had a really good relationship with the Kentucky coach. That's what made it hard. Is he had a great relationship with the Kentucky staff, the O-line coach, and it worked out well because he has since left and he's at Alabama now. But he had and then the entire staff did a great job recruiting him. But I think at the end of the day, the power of Notre Dame won over. And that's what I ultimately picked Notre Dame, is because it just was kind of too good of an opportunity to pass up. And especially when you hear the things about what his family emphasizes about what the priority should be, I think that ultimately is what sealed the deal. And if the weight part checks out, guys, I mean, it could end up being a big, big win for Notre Dame, because he's a talented kid. He really is. He really is.
Being paired with Coach Easton and Coach Bayless is going to be nice.
If especially Matt Bayless. Right. I mean, that's going to be the primary one. But if the light if the weight thing works out and he can be 290 plus and play at that weight, he's going to have a chance to be a good one. I gave him a 5-star upside grade, Ryan. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to kind of really talk about what you saw on film, but man, he is long, athletic, and we talk a lot about heavy hands. That cat's got some very heavy hands.
Well, he's a 60+ foot shot putter, so it makes sense.
Absurd.
Yes,
that is absurd.
At that size, because he does not look like he has a ton of power, but then you watch his paws and he's got some pop in there for sure. Absolutely.
All right. Tony Stengel asks, is the defense going to look drastically different under Golden or just a little different? And is this a little worrisome, 3 systems in 2 years? This goes back to the question earlier, Tony.
Sounds familiar.
Ryan, let's address just quit. And Vince, let's address. Look, I think that there's going to be more 4 down. That's what you guys saw from practices, correct? A little bit more 4 down.
Yep.
As the base. However, there could be some games. I think of one at the end in the beginning of the year where we could see more 3 down because of a matchup thing. Whereas last year they were sort of very balanced between 3 and 4. I think this is going to be primarily 4 that can easily transition to 3. And I think we're going to see more zone coverages.
Agreed.
And I think we're going to see more aggressive uses of the linebackers as weapons, run game and pass game. I think those are the 3 primary changes. Anything else that you guys like to add to some things that are going to look a little bit different for the defense? And we addressed Tony, the second part of your question is a very good question. We just addressed it a little bit earlier, so I wanted to get that last part.
Yep.
Here's an interesting one. Could Gabe Weiss ask, could Louisville become a major player in college football in the next five or 6 years with their NIL incentives? Obviously, this is referring to the fact that they just got, is it Dalton Brooks, right? That's the name of the kid from Texas.
Ruben Owens, wasn't
Ruben
it?
Owens, that's right. Dalton, yes. Dalton Brooks is the receiver. I get those two confused.
Yep.
Ruben Owens, who's considered a 5-star running back. People thought he was going to go to A&M, then he's leaning Texas, A&M, and then he ends up going to Louisville. Out of Texas.
Money, baby.
Yeah, and I think it was Adidas money, actually.
Yeah.
That got the deal done.
Good for him.
Ryan, do you have an opinion on this? Because I do. I have a very strong opinion on this situation. Not a negative one, just an opinion.
I don't think that Louisville is ever going to get to a point where they're a power, right? Like become a major player in college football. I think that it's at some point, like, the NIL money, the incentives, right, quote unquote, that you put in there, Gabe, it's going to matter short-term stuff, but I'll say that recruits will start second-guessing the decision if there's not tangible success on the field, right? And I think that obviously a guy like Ruben Owens is going to help that cause, but I don't know if it's ever going to flip the script of they're in the ACC with a team like a Clemson, for instance, right? Like I don't know if it's going to move the needle quite enough for me, to be honest.
You're going to have to shell out some serious money in order to be a perennial player on the national stage. If that's the only avenue that you've got to get big players in, right? And I think after a while, those guys aren't there for the right reasons anyway, and I don't know how that affects a team game, to be honest with you. There could be the occasional big swing where you might land one, and that's a big deal and all that, but I just don't see a school like that, like, we're using Louisville as an example. I just don't see them being a player all the time because of that. That would be very difficult for me to see.
I think a thing, too, is here's the deal with Louisville. Right, like if a school like Louisville has just buku bucks like an A&M, sure they could buy some guys. Number one, teams aren't consistently buying players. You know what I mean? Like the NIL thing is a little new. I think as kids learn more about the opportunities that come when you're in school as well, that's going to kind of negate some of the desire to go to an outlier type of school compared to Bama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, Clemson, that kind of thing. But I think the thing, too, is what you're seeing from programs like Louisville. Ryan and I have heard this from several recruits. There are some schools that you would, if I told you they were offering like high six-figure deals to players, you'd be surprised. Like, wait a minute, that school's throwing around that kind of money? And this is coming to kids that are like committed to Notre Dame and some other people. And what it is they're throwing it out to they're trying to buy a few guys to just kind of help move the needle.
Sure.
What they're not going to do is be able to buy enough.
They're not going to be able to buy 20 guys.
Right.
What
they'll do is they'll get enough top level talent to kind of have those big names, but it'll be kind of like when Louisville had Lamar Jackson. They had the best player in college football. They were still a 9-3, 9-4 caliber team because the rest of their roster wasn't quite good enough.
Right. Exactly.
They're still going to have that problem.
Exactly.
It's just, now they're going to be able to get some guys like a Ruben Owens and maybe a Cole Martin if he can do it. It won't be enough to completely close the gap. But I think what it'll do is I think what it'll happen is, could they become a major player in college football? No. Can they become a top 4 to 5 program in the ACC on the regular? Absolutely. And I think that's where these impacts could be good, is seeing a program like Louisville step up and be a legitimate 9-win team on a consistent basis in the ACC. That makes the ACC better. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you'll see is these teams won't become forces in college football, like from a championship playoff standpoint with any regularity. I think what can happen if some of these teams like a TCU, like a Louisville, like a South Carolina can start having some success, buying a couple players a year, what it will do is it give you an opportunity to raise the floor of your conference a little bit. But it doesn't happen. It doesn't go into situations where, why do you guys keep messing with that? You're driving me crazy. Okay, I'm getting dizzy. So I think it's a good question, Gabe.
That's a really good question.
Yeah,
it's a really good question. I'll take it I just take it one step deeper, and I kind of mentioned it before. When guys are going to school just for the paycheck, it's different than going to college for the right reasons. And I feel like playing for your teammates and all of that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily go out the window. But at the same time, it's not the same. And guys that are going someplace just for the money, I just don't see them being all that successful as a team. You know what I mean? So that's part of it for me as well. And I just don't know that you can sustain that.
I know we're talking about the ACC, obviously, since that's the conference that they play in. Here's one, Brian. Do you think that Louisville could overtake Kentucky as the premier program in the state of Kentucky? I think is a better question because Kentucky's built a pretty good program with Coach Stoops, and it's been pretty consistent recently. But.
Yeah, I think they can. I think there's a higher ceiling because I think that Kentucky's always going to have to battle against the SEC teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and
is not as there's not obstacles.
It doesn't matter when those two teams are playing head to head. Where it matters, however, is if Kentucky's having the occasional 10-win year, right, which they've had 2 of in the last 5 years. Because, as you said, Mark Stoops has done a really good job there. The thing that happens, though, is those in-between years tend to be a little bit more down. And I think this is a perfect example. When you look at what Mark Stoops has done in the last 4 years, for example, they've done some really nice things. They've gone, 2-0 in bowl games. They've had or 4-0 in bowl games. They've had 2 finishes in the top 20. They went 10-3 in 2018. That was that Josh Allen-led team, not the quarterback Josh Allen, the edge rusher Josh Allen. Ran the ball really well. Then they went 8-5, 5-6, and then 10-3 again, right? And I think they're going to be pretty decent this year too. But then they're going to lose Rodriguez. They're going to lose the quarterback. They're going to lose a lot more guys, and they're going to go back to 8-5. And whereas I think Louisville, because they're in the ACC, has a potential to be a 9-10 win team more consistently, which then makes them a little bit more attractive to maybe some of those recruits they're currently losing to Kentucky. So, yes, if they do have a rise in the ACC, Ryan, I do – or who asked that question? Ryan, was it you that asked that question?
Yeah.
I think what that would allow them to do is then have a better better superficial product to sell that could be the difference between them going down to Florida and they're both recruiting the kid down in Florida and Louisville gets them. Or, getting some more of those in. Because Kentucky will produce some decent in-state players, and then they both do really well with kids from like Ohio and Indiana. I think it could allow them to start winning some of those head-to-head battles in recruiting, which then lead to them winning more battles on the field. So that's kind of how I see that one playing out. And, but they got to be able to gain some continuity with their staff. I think Satterfield's flirtation with South Carolina did to Louisville what Harbaugh's flirtation with the NFL did to Michigan. It stunted all the growth and all the momentum that the program had after a decent season. It just stunted all of it because it was very obvious he didn't want to be there. So if you're a high school kid, you're like, well, this dude doesn't – I don't even know if this dude wants to be here. The longer he stays there, the more he can spin that. Like, hey, that was, blown out of proportion or whatever. I don't – that's not where it is. But it certainly hurts, in my opinion. It certainly hurt at that particular time, in my view. Here's another one. Here's a good one, guys. Vince, I'm going to ask you first. Gabe Weiss is pulling a John A1 today and throwing out a mess of questions. I absolutely love it, by the way.
Man,
that's not an insult. That's not an insult at all. That's a compliment. He says, if you were the commissioner of the Big 12 after Oklahoma and Texas left, what teams would you have added?
Ooh.
I wonder if it would only be a Power 4 in a few years. Let me just say one thing just to remind people. So while you think about it, they lost Oklahoma and Texas. The 4 teams that they added were BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and Central Florida. So those are the 4 teams that were added. So, Vince, first to you. You were the commissioner of the Big 12, and you could basically kind of get who you wanted within reason. You're not going to go raid the Pac-12 and the Big 10. Let's be realistic. I'm going to take Ohio State and Michigan, right? Let's be realistic. But what would be the 4 teams that you would have made a move for?
I actually don't have a problem with some of the teams that they took, right? I don't really have a problem with Cincinnati. I think that their brand is growing. That's a good brand to attach yourself to. But I would have done my research to make sure it's sustainable. You know what I mean? I don't have a problem with them going after BYU. I think that's a good brand, and I think they have a very specific fan base that's not going to go anywhere, right? So I have no problem with BYU. Houston, okay. I mean,
that's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I mean,
I
get
big market. That's a big market, and they have history with that league because they used to be in the Southwest Conference.
Right. So I don't have an issue with Houston. My biggest issue is Central Florida. I don't necessarily dig that. I get that they're in a decent market as well with Florida and all that.
Huge city. I don't. But let me ask you this, Vince and Ryan: is anybody in Central Florida, and I mean literally Central Florida, the state, all of a sudden tuning into Big 12 games because UCF is is now in the Big 12. That's like saying people in Rutgers, people in New Jersey, New York are now paying attention to the Iowa-Nebraska game because Rutgers is in the Big 12 or Big 10. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Yeah, I would have. Okay, so I'm not taking Central Florida.
So who would you have taken? So you're okay with Houston, okay with BYU. Yep. I wouldn't have taken Central Florida. How about, did you talk about Cincinnati?
I would have been okay with Cincinnati. I was really okay with 3 of the 4, to be honest with you. But so here's what I would have done. I would have gone after some former members. I would have gone after Nebraska. I'd try to get them back.
That was mine.
I'd try to get them back in the fold, man. And my pitch would be, guess what? You didn't think you were a big dog? Well, guess what? Now you can be the big dog of the Big 12. You know what I mean? I would have gone hard after Nebraska. I would not have had an issue with that. That's the one I would have gone the hardest for.
Vince, took mine,
so real quick, Ryan, give you time to rebound. You can still go with the same one.
I know.
Ryan's like, but I just want to be the one that was known for coming up with the idea.
I wanted the receipt that I was first, man.
So Vince, you were cool with 3 of them. What? You would have just not gone UCF and tried to throw a bunch of money. Because here's the deal with the Nebraska thing. That was going to be one of mine as well. I'll give you the rest of mine after Ryan goes. But that's going to require a big payout.
Sure.
And what would have made that difficult is the league that you're both with are both, they have the Big 10 and the Big 12. So would have, you could have maybe gone to the TV deal and said, hey, help us get Nebraska. But then like, well, wait a minute, we're also with the Big 10 and we have an even bigger deal with the Big 10 than we have with you.
Sure. It'd be tough. No, it would be really hard.
You'd had to throw some serious money. You'd have to throw some serious money at that one. But I would have absolutely done everything I could to make it happen. Nebraska absolutely needs to get out of the Big 10.
Big 10?
And go back to the Big 12. You're 100% correct. 100% correct.
Yeah.
Ryan,
I was thinking of another big old Big 12 team as well. I was thinking about Missouri maybe would be another one that I might go after. So Nebraska was the number one. I thought of that one first, just putting that out there, that in my mind I had Nebraska on the top of my mind first. But so Nebraska,
Ryan, it's not about being first, it's about being right.
What if you're both? Can't you be both?
Yes, you can. It's a good attitude for my director of recruiting to have.
Yeah, that's right.
So I would say Nebraska, Missouri to get the Big 12 back to what it was at one point, at least a couple of the old members. Then I'm fine with Houston, completely fine with Houston. They play a good brand of football. It's in a big market, like you said. I'm cool with that. And then I guess I'd be okay with Cincinnati. I'm like kind of indifferent on Cincinnati. It's like fine, like regionally it doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's like it's a good ascending program with good coaching. So I'm okay with Cincinnati.
You know what I like about Cincinnati? It gives West Virginia a regional rival. You can create a regional rival because you've already had West Virginia in the Big 12, and you're like, who the heck?
And that's just weird.
Exactly? But now with Cincinnati, you now have kind of that, like, they're going to play every year for me. I mean, again, if it's 12 teams, whatever decision they decide to go with scheduling, like, to me, they're going to play every single year. I'm going to force that rivalry because that is, I mean, look, you already have, there's a natural sort of Pittsburgh-ish, Cincinnati-ish rivalry. Morgantown's like a hop and a skip from Pittsburgh. I guarantee you there's a lot of Steeler fans in the city of Morgantown.
Absolutely.
I mean, people that are from there, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd be willing to bet you a lot of money. It would not be hard to create that rivalry, in my opinion, between West Virginia and Cincinnati. So I think that actually makes sense based on what's already there.
Okay.
Right? So that's why I like the Cincinnati angle. So Ryan, you're okay with BYU, correct?
I didn't even bring up BYU, but I would be more okay with BYU than Cincinnati, to be honest.
Okay, so BYU you're okay with. Houston?
Yes. Houston I'm good with.
Okay.
And then I threw in the Missouri, Nebraska.
If you can only get one, let's say you can get Nebraska, you can't get Missouri. Where do you go there?
Then I would take Cincinnati.
Okay. For me, I would have done what they did instead of Central Florida. However, I'd have gone for SMU. That's what I would have done. Now, SMU is more football and tradition related. I mean, you've already kind of have sort of the Dallas area, and it's kind of like, people in Dallas aren't going to tune off the Oklahoma Texas game because SMU and TCU are playing, right? Mm-hmm. Let's be honest. So it's not so much about the market as just getting a quality team. I think SMU has the potential in a Power 5 league to ascend. They are in Dallas. They have had some success when they've had good coaches. The problem is they haven't been able to keep those good coaches because they're in the AAC.
Rhett
So-
Lashley's our new coach, right?
Right. And they just
Yeah.
lost Sonny Dykes to TCU,
Mhm.
correct? Didn't he take the TCU job?
He did.
So I probably would have gone SMU. I like the BYU pickup. I do. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there is, I mean, if we remember, BYU for a time and TCU were in the same league. They were in the Mountain West together. And so there were some really good games between TCU and BYU back in the day. I'm fine with that rivalry. I think, Utah's not so far out of the way that it doesn't make sense in the, I mean, is it any different than Nebraska being in the Big 12 kind of thing? Like geographically, not that much. I would have gone for that. Honestly, I would have made a play. The first thing I would have done is I would have made a play for sort of a revival of the Big 12/Southwest Conference. I would have tried to say, hey, Pac-12, how's that Colorado deal working out for you guys? Like, you guys happy with Colorado? No, we'll take them, right? Can we get a little buyout fee and we'll take Colorado? I don't know if Colorado would be willing to do that. I'm just saying hypothetically if they were. Same thing with Nebraska. Those two for sure I would have gone after. But BYU I like. Houston's a no-brainer for me. I think Houston, with the backing of a Power 5 league, can become a good top 25 caliber football team. I really do. And I think because it's a big market, they can recruit well there. They've had some good top 25 teams in the last decade. Art Browse had some top 25 teams. Kevin Sumlin had some top 25. Even Major Applewhite had a couple, 9-win seasons. So I think with the Big 12 in the backing, I think it helps their financial situation because they're in a better league. They're going to get more money, which is going to make it easier for them to hang on to some of the stuff that they get. So Houston makes a lot of sense. SMU makes a lot of sense. And I would actually, and the only reason I'm definitely on the Cincinnati train is, number one, Cincinnati has a very strong reputation as a football conference at a football program at a time when you desperately need that. The premise of the question, could it only be a Power 4 in a few years? You need to have on-field success. That's the best way to create financial success, is to win games on the field. You just brought in a team that just beat Notre Dame and just went to the college football playoff. Right? Something Texas never did, right? As far as the playoff. They beat Notre Dame once. They needed overtime to beat a 4-8 Notre Dame team, right? Those mighty Longhorns, right? You got curb stomped the year before when you played Notre Dame, when Notre Dame was actually good. But they never made a playoff berth or even sniffed one, I don't think, correct? So to me, you add Cincinnati, but the bigger thing for that is I really like the aspect of West Virginia's not going anywhere. You've now created sort of a regional rivalry to where now there's a team, and also this makes a lot of sense too, guys, because there's now a team in there where a lot of your other sports teams don't have to travel quite as far now for at least some games. Where right now, if you're in West Virginia, you're traveling all the way for all these games. Now, all of a sudden, you got in certain sports a natural rivalry. I think you could see a Cincinnati West Virginia rivalry start to build in all sports. I mean, Bob Huggins. Hey, where did he used to coach, right? If all of a sudden Cincinnati and West Virginia are in the same league, now all of a sudden we're going to get to see that match up a lot more while Bob Huggins is still in West Virginia. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of pluses to that. It's an old Big East rivalry being reestablished in the Big 12, and that's what I kind of like about that. So Houston, SMU, BYU, and Cincinnati would have been my move if I couldn't go get Nebraska and Colorado. If I could get Nebraska and Colorado, I probably wouldn't bring Cincinnati in, and I probably wouldn't bring BYU in. I would stick with the two Texas schools and then bring in Colorado and Nebraska is what I would do. So all had different takes. Good stuff, guys. Very good stuff. Maddie K got a scheduled question. Is IB planning on going to any games? I plan on getting a 2-game ticket plan, and I am either going to Cal or Stanford or UNLV. IB's at every game. Somebody's going to be at every game.
There was a couple comments. I think I started
like hosting a tent for outs. Yeah. So what we're thinking about doing, and we haven't decided on this fully, it just depends on a couple different things, but we're going to probably have some sort of presence at just about every game. It may not be like the big spread and all the food and all the other kind of stuff like we did last year. It may just be like, hey, we're going to have a tent. Here's my car. I'm going to sit. I'm going to chill. We're going to drink some Mountain Dews like we did at the Blue Gold game. I mean, that was fun, right? I mean, we just stood there. We had some Mountain Dews, some water, and we just talked ball for a little bit until we had to go into the stadium. Right. That was fun. And as long as people understand, hey, these are the only games where we're going to have like a big spread, just to understand, this isn't a tailgate per se, is more of just we'll have a couple big tailgates and then a bunch of gatherings. How about
There you
that?
go.
Is
I like
that a better
that.
way of saying it?
Yeah, I like
Because
that.
I hate calling it a tailgate when you're just hanging around talking. Like that's not a tailgate to me. That's just
That's
a
just
meet
hanging
and
around
greet.
talking. I mean,
Yeah, it's a meet and greet.
Yeah.
Yeah. A tailgate is we got food, we got,
Right.
and all that good stuff. So we'll do a couple of those, but yeah.
There's a follow-up here. Toe Jam wants to know if we're going to be at any or all the away games.
As of right now, my plan is to be at all of them.
Yeah.
I'm usually the one that goes to the away games.
Yep.
So
I think I'm gonna go. I'll be at least at the Navy games. That's only a
Right.
couple hours away from me. So.
Possibly Syracuse as well. We talked about maybe doing that one as well for you, Ryan. Yeah, but I'll be in Vegas. Now, if they want to come, they're welcome to come. But I'm paying for myself to be in Vegas. And the only one that's a question mark now is the LA game. Now, someone from IB will be there, but it won't be me. So we'll kind of see how that
We'll
goes.
figure that one out. Yeah, because
we'll
Sean might have women's basketball, and who knows.
Yeah, we'll get some stuff here. It would probably like Andrew McDonough, who's done some writing for us, lives in Washington. I may just fly him down.
Ooh,
coming in from there. It's all about planning. But I have
thinking outside the box.
I have
love
zero desire to step foot in the state of California at this point in time. So don't need to get into why. I'm just saying that's why that may
too much traffic.
Yeah, that's it.
Too much smug.
It's my story. I'm sticking to it.
We can do the rest of the show on reasons why, but we're not going to do that. Jacob Watson says, what do you think of the cornerback rotation will be? Ryan, I'll give you first crack at this. Do you think it could be Hart, Morrison, Mickey or Bracey? So what do you think the cornerback rotation will be? And do you think it could be Hart, Morrison, Mickey, and Bracey?
Barnes
so Ryan,
just getting benched.
I was about to say, where's Barnes? I mean, I think it's going to end up being Cam Hart's obviously starting at one corner. The other corner, I think, is going to be a mixture of Ryan Barnes and Clarence Lewis is what I think is going to happen. Starting nickel is going to be Tariq Bracey. I think Mickey is going to see some time. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually he sees time both at outside and inside at nickel at times, too. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Jalen Mickey has that type of role. And I would say Morrison is backing up Cam Hart, whatever spot he ends up playing.
How about you, Vince?
I agree with what Ryan is saying. I don't agree with what Jacob is saying. I think that Ryan is the ship that I'm coming in on. I like where he was at with a little bit of a rotation at the other corner and some, depending on the matchups, who we see at nickel, that kind of thing. I absolutely agree with that. Ryan Barnes needs to be in the mix, and I think Clarence Lewis is going to have to do something drastic to not be in the mix as well.
Yes.
I mean, something drastically negative to not be in the mix.
I don't think any of us have ever advocated for Clarence Lewis not playing.
Right.
I think it's just there needs to be, hopefully someone pushes him into a role that's more conducive for what he could be good at. Exactly. Maybe that is as a starter that rotates more. Maybe it is, Ryan, as you mentioned earlier, a slot. But, Clarence Lewis is going to play. And Clarence Lewis has had some good games at Notre Dame as well. We remember the bad. That's just the light. Like, there are still people that don't think Troy Pride was good. There are literally still Notre Dame fans who think that. Why? Because they just remember the couple times he got beat. That's just the reality of life, of course, especially when people are only watching on TV, right? Because you only really notice cornerbacks when they get beat. So that's just the reality of it. But he's going to play. Bracey's going to play. There's no question Bracey's going to play. Hart's going to play. I think after that, there are big question marks. Is it Ryan Barnes? Is it Philip Riley? Is it going to be one of the freshmen? I
forgot honestly, about Riley.
And let's not completely write off Chance Tucker yet either if he's healthy. So I think that there's going to be a battle. I don't know who's going to be in the rotation, but I know three that are going to have some role somewhere, and it's Cam Hart, Clarence Lewis, and Tariq Bracey. I just don't know what those roles are going to be. Archer, our resident Ohio State fan, followed up. They called it Bullet last year, so I was right on that. He says, but it's more likely to be a rover now with the new coordinator. And he said that Jack Leo is the hybrid D-end edge position. So thank you for clarifying that for us. Let's get to some more questions here. Ben L. Here's a good one. This was kind of off of the conversation that they had last night on the IB Nation Sports Talk show. His thoughts on who would be a good fit for the NBC booth for the Irish games for you guys. I know this will not happen, but I liked Dan Hicks as play-by-play and Mayock as a color analyst. I'm going to ask you guys this question. Who would you like to see in the booth?
Okay.
And then the second part of the question is, what do you guys think of Sean's idea of NBC coming up with sort of like how they have the Mannings doing it in Monday night games, but having the Golics sort of do the Homer broadcast type of thing.
Ooh, yeah.
Or like, where you can maybe watch like on Peacock.
It's an alternate broadcast.
Where you can watch Peacock with in the alternate broadcast it's the goalie. You're listening to the goalies do the thing like you see.
And they would have guests and they would do different things and blah, 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 blah. Yeah,
correct.
Goalie cast.
Yeah. So first thought is, who would you like to see in the booth? And then the second one is, what your thoughts on the goalie cast? So Ryan, it looks like you have an answer ready. So let's let it go.
Well, I'm gonna steal one from Ben. I would like to see Mike Mayock back in the booth. I like Mike Mayock. I always have. I have no problem with that. I'm struggling with the play-by-play though. I don't know if I have a perfect answer to that, but to the second part of your question, Brian, I'd be all for the goalie cast.
Yeah,
I think that would be hysterical. And I would love it.
Because you don't need a seasoned play-by-play guy to do the goalie.
They're
cast.
just talking ball.
They're just chilling, and
the dad would provide the comedy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, the only thing for me is Junior is hit or miss for me. Like when he's talking about certain things, I'm like, dude, I just don't want to hear what you have to say on this. I just don't think, I just don't agree with you. I don't like it. But when he's talking ball, and the couple times I've heard him as in a bowl game or where he's like the color guy for a football game, he actually I'm not surprised by this, but because he played at Notre Dame, but he's a really smart football. He knows how to talk football like a smart football guy, right? Sure. So if he were to kind of bring, what I don't want is both of them to be comic relief. To me, that just gets annoying. But let the dad be funny and then also talk X's and O's, and then let Junior kind of be like that. Hey, talk line play. Talk about, because here, I think that'd be enjoyable. And then, whoever your special guest is that week can do whatever they can do. As long as it's just not 3 hours of just them laughing and joking and inside jokes with each other, I think it'd be really good. Right. So it's like with anything. Do you do it the right way? And I think they're both experienced media people. They're both really smart. If they did it the right way and the premise of the show and what their roles were kind of defined as the right way, I think it'd be great. I really do. As far as the booth, I don't know why Paul Burmeister doesn't get enough.
Going to be because we have to have the conversation from a realistic standpoint, right? Because you can't talk about people that are hired by other companies.
I want Jim Nance and Brent Musburger back.
Right.
Okay. Not.
Exactly. You have to be realistic about this.
Right.
And you can't just put two color guys in there because that doesn't work either. You need to have somebody that knows how to do play-by-play. That's an actual talent that you have to have. And neither Golics have that talent. Nobody that is Notre Dame affiliated necessarily has that talent, or at least is good at it.
And that wasn't what Sean was saying. He wasn't saying to have them in the booth.
And he wouldn't say that because he's a play-by-play guy.
Right.
But no, I think Paul Burmeister would be a great fit. His history is on TV, not on radio. It's on TV. I think he's actually a better TV guy than radio.
And he's done some stuff for Notre Dame in the past, filling in for the play-by-plays. He's done spring games. I think Paul does a really good job. He comes across as pro Notre Dame, not Notre Dame homer. I don't want a Notre Dame homer doing play-by-play.
Absolutely
I want a pro Notre Dame guy doing play-by-play, though. I'm going to be honest with you. It's a freaking Notre Dame broadcast.
And it should be. Right. And honestly, Ryan Harris does a good job on the radio. I actually find him to be kind of funny.
Only reason I don't advocate for Ryan doing color is just because I just have never really listened. I've listened to a couple snippets, but I've never listened to him. But I've talked ball with Ryan.
Yeah.
And he's a sharp guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and he's got experience doing it. So
he would have to clean up some stuff. I mean, he kind of talks over the play-by-play guy,
Wait, hold on a second. You can't be having people talking over other people in shows, man. That's just not acceptable. Not acceptable. That never happens here, ever.
And he is a homer. He'll cheer in box. You know what I mean? So,
which I bet in TV he would tamp down a little bit. I
completely agree with that. So I would be fine with those two because they already have a good relationship with each other. Just picking them up and moving them to the TV side, and then Sean and I will take care of the radio side. So we're good.
Vince, you can't do that and be the head baseball coach of Notre Dame, man. Come on. I mean, you're just volunteering yourself for all these jobs.
I was also going to put Sean Stiers up for the play-by-play and let Mayock be his color animal.
This is all part of some Ryan's trying to slide into the IB Nation Sports Talk show. So he wants to slide Stiers into the NBC role. You guys are killing me, man.
Now Stiers has a face for radio, so he needs to be on the radio side. So,
hey, Vince is allowed to say that because him and Sean have known each other for a while, but I'm texting Sean right now and telling him that you said that. Like, you need to listen to the 1 hour and 58-minute mark about what Vince said to you during today's you in today's podcast.
Probably agree with me, but
no, but I mean that would be something that I would advocate for, is if Burmeister transitioned into TV, I would definitely,
because he already does women's basketball
and he does a great job, and he knows the game. And he does high school football. I mean, so it's not like doing a football game would be new for him. Yes,
right.
Correct.
So, but no, realistically, from an NBC standpoint, I would have no problem with them taking the radio guys and putting them in the NBC booth, and there you go. And Mayak is available since he's no longer a GM of the Raiders, so I would be fine bringing him back as well. I think he did a great job. I enjoyed listening to Mike Mayock personally. So,
Mike Mayock's a smart guy.
Well, that's kind of part of the problem, is I think people didn't view him as like talked over them, but I'm like, come with the right attitude. But I think also that is aided by, do you have a really good play-by-play guy?
Yes.
And I think Burmeister would be a really nice compliment to Mike Mayock.
I think completely
that too would be really good. Dan Hicks is fine. He does nice job fill-ins, but he wouldn't be the guy that I would be like, oh, that's got to be the play-by-play guy.
You know what? And let me say one other thing. Mike Monaco is a Notre Dame grad, and he was kind of grandfathered into a lot of Notre Dame stuff before he was ready. But he did a lot of the College World Series games, and he did the Notre Dame games, right, on ESPN. And I thought he did a really good job.
He's growing,
You would not have known that he was a Notre Dame grad doing those games.
Yeah.
I thought he did an excellent job. I will say that. And I've said negative things about Mike in the past because I think he was allowed to do a lot of things before he was ready. But I think he has really grown into that job, and I think he would do a good job.
He's a good dude. I like Mike. Mike's a nice kid.
Absolutely.
So you're thinking about him possibly being a radio guy if Burmeister were to transition?
Or the TV
I'm definitely not ready for him to do TV. He's still got a ways to go. But radio would then transition to TV. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job with the World Series.
Here's one person I do not want doing play-by-play for Notre Dame games, and I'm adamant about this: Jack Collinsworth.
Oh, and he's going to get it.
Yeah, he's just never look, great sound, right? It sounds great. He just doesn't do a good job, in my view.
He didn't do a great job as the halftime guy.
If he wasn't a Notre Dame grad and his name wasn't Collinsworth, people would not be saying, "Oh, this guy's really good." They'd just be like, "Yeah, this guy has a great sound," but they don't really know what he's talking about.
I can't really stand Chris Collinsworth, to be honest. Either, for being honest,
but at least you kind of feel like he knows football.
I don't mind. I've gotten used to him doing NFL games and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the son, and I think if you want to talk about nepotism, that's a prime example right there. He did not belong, and now he's going to be gifted the play-by-play job on NBC. And
I just don't. Yeah. Because NBC looks at Notre Dame as their minor leagues,
right? Absolutely,
and that's why I can't wait for that contract to be over. And I pray, that Fox makes a run at Notre Dame. It wouldn't shock me if they do. It really would, because for Fox it would make sense. You got the big noon kickoff, and then you've got the Notre Dame game right afterwards, and then Notre Dame could determine, hey, we're either going to be at 3:30 or 7. When we'll decide when. And every game we have, you're going to
Big 10 game at noon. Absolutely.
Right. And it's not like you say, well, you don't have they don't do a pregame. They don't do much of a pregame show for Notre Dame now. It's like garbage. It's like like half butt. It's like it's so lame. NBC's Notre Dame product is lame.
I completely agree.
They don't care. It's like you have a one NFL game a week and one college game a week. Why is it not like the best production ever?
I could not agree
for
more.
both of those, because they don't care about the Notre Dame contract.
Johnson would be amazing. He works for Fox. He's not coming over anytime soon. But Gus Johnson, he was great. Doing that Shamrock Series game up at Soldier Field, that was great. Loved every second of it. But realistically, he's not going to be in the NBC booth. So we can't really talk about him as an option.
I would say this. That would be part of, if it was up to me, that'd be part of my negotiation with Fox. I want Gus and Klatt doing all of our games.
It'd be great.
Because I think I've said this, I disagree with some of Joel Klatt's opinions when it's off the thing. We just don't always agree with a lot of things, although he had some nice things to say about NIL and USC that I agreed with. But I think he's a good color guy. He's a really good color guy. And I know some people, Gus is one of those you hate him or love him kind of guys. I think it's a great job. He can make a 10-7 game sound exciting.
Yes.
And I love that. And yes, it's a shtick, but it's an exciting shtick. And I do think it's kind of like Dick Vitale. Dick Vitale's thing is a shtick, but it's also who he is. this is who I am. Now I'm going to kind of play it up a little bit for the cameras, but like Dick Vitale's a passionate guy that loves the game. And sure, he's got the monikers and all that was part of the production aspect of it. But you're sitting at home talking to Dick Vitale 10 years ago and you're watching a game with him and he's kind of the same dude.
Same thing.
Right. And I guarantee you Gus Johnson's like that too when he's watching a game. Like just like, yes, it's a shtick. That's okay. But it works for him because it is also genuine.
Right.
Like you ever heard like Mark Jones try to get excited? It's terrible. That guy sucks. You know what I mean? Like Vince, you're probably like, who's Mark Jones? Exactly. Like some of those guys, they try to get excited and you're like, this guy's terrible.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
like Gus, it's like you can just feel like he's like passionate about doing his job. And I love people that are passionate about the job that they do. And that would be part of my negotiation is I want Gus and Klatt in our booth every week.
Do you have a good Dickie V impression?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
How about you, Vince? You got one?
Nobody wants to hear that at all.
Yeah.
How much of a super chat to make this happen?
Yeah. you throw in $100 super chat and I'll give you a couple Dickie V impersonations.
A lot of things I'll do for that.
Yes. So yes.
Like 7 money talks.
Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Somebody asked this question. Brian, the fish asked, Brian, would you rather be forced to shill ESPN's recruiting service for a month or relocate to San Francisco for a month? This is such an easy answer. I would be wearing ESPN gear. I would have ESPN hats. I'd have ESPN stuff in the background. If those are the only two choices, right? Like I can only do one and I have no choice but to do anything else. There's no question about it. Like I would do the ESPN shilling for a month. And rather than being in San Francisco for a month. 10 years ago, I would not have said that. I used to really enjoy going to San Francisco, but it's a little different place now. So
I love this South Park episode of San Francisco when it's overrun with smug. Have you ever seen that one?
No, did not watch South Park.
Oh, it's always so funny, man.
Sorry. Oh boy. All right, let's get back to some questions. Let's get back on track. Sean Lacero, congrats on the 10,000 subscribers. Thank you, Sean. He says, why I subscribe? Family feel. You all work harder than anyone out there. Great analysis, not hot takes, just real. Loyal subscriber, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
I appreciate that very, very much. Truly. Like when I get emails from people saying, hey, just want to let you know we loved it. I really do appreciate that stuff because look, this is a fun job, but it's also a hard job. You know, every time someone's mad about the speed of the board or it all comes to my inbox and I'm dealing with it. So, and that's fine. That's part of running a business, right? But it is nice to also balance some of that out sometimes with, hey, you guys are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. It makes all that other stuff worth it. So
pat on the back every now and again.
Yeah.
Just
yes. Appreciate that very, very much.
We do need more hot takes though.
Yes. Well, to me, I guess it defines on what is a hot take. If it's a hot take based on actual analysis, but maybe something that's not out, that's not a normal take, I'm fine with that. What I hate is the stuff that I'm like, they don't even believe that. Like you can listen to them talk on ESPN sometimes, and like I'll turn it on just every now and then. I'm like, is it any better? No. But like you listen to Skip Bayless, and like he doesn't believe half the crap that's coming out of his mouth. And it's like you can't possibly believe that because you can't possibly be that stupid or that obnoxious. But it's an act, and I can't stand people that will say something that they don't believe. Lou Samoji we had this conversation. So we used to do this thing for the magazine where it was called Point Counterpoint. Vince, you've done these before.
Yep.
And the one thing that Lou said is we're never going to do something where we don't actually believe what we're defending. Now you may see both merit on both sides, so I'll pick one because I can make a case for both. But if you genuinely don't believe in the side you're going to take, then don't do it. We'll find something else to talk about. And I always respected that about Lou. It's one of the many things I respected about Lou. It's like, no, we're not going to take a side on something just to create an argument. I can't stand that. And that to me those are hot takes. Or you say something that you just know is outlandish and dumb, but it's going to get clicks and stuff. I can't stand stuff like that. I really can't. But if you're going to have a hot take like Ryan, you had one the other day about Deion Colsey, right? But that's based on it was during the receiver show about how him emerging could have the biggest impact on the receiving core than anybody else.
Yep.
And I believe that was your take. And but that's built on you actually believe that. It's a bit of a hot take. It's like, because it's kind of coming out of nowhere. But to me, if that's a hot take, then I'm okay with that. When you're going to say, stupid things like, Andrew Wiggins is a terrible basketball player and you're never going to win another championship with him. Like just because you're being an idiot, then you get all the reactions that come to you after he wins a championship with the Warriors.
Did someone say that?
Yeah.
Someone say? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Freaking Nick Wright, who's king of hot takes, dumb hot takes.
Yeah.
He is in that category with Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith. Mr. Dwayne Haskins, may he rest in peace, is, he's more of a runner, stupid takes like that.
That was the worst one I've ever heard in my life.
Ever.
Actually,
Ever.
That was really bad.
Ever.
It was really bad.
Stephen Robinson, does Notre Dame and Jim Knowles playing each other in the bowl game give an advantage to either team in the Ohio State game, or does it cancel each other out? Just want to clarify, Stephen, Jim Knowles was already gone by the time the bowl game played. Now, the advantage, the small advantage, we've been asked this before, the small advantage that Notre Dame has is they did get a chance to study all his games.
Right.
Because they still studied his defense, and then they'll study the Ohio State personnel. Jim Knowles didn't spend as much time in bowl prep looking at Notre Dame film as he did, because he wasn't preparing for that game. Having said that, because it is an opener, he's going to have plenty of time to make up for it. So is there a small advantage to Notre Dame? Slight, but it's not one that's going to have an impact on if Notre Dame wins that game, it's not going to be because they faced his defense in a bowl game. Because number one, it's not going to look exactly like it did last year. It's going to be different personnel, different things.
Notre Dame offense is different. Notre Dame offense has different personnel than they had last year. Look,
your game plan's going to be different with Tyler Buckner quarterback than Jack Cohn.
Call me crazy. I don't think they're going to throw the ball 70 times against
God,
the
I hope
host.
not.
So I'm just saying, I don't think that's going to be the game plan. So they're going to attack.
Because you can't even say if they go to overtime, because now it's like 2 overtimes and then you're just 1 play each. So you have to go a lot of stinking overtimes for overtime to be the reason. Yeah. Speaking of dumb things, the NCAA's overtime rule is there.
So bad.
We have a super chat from James Amadai. Vince, I'm going to let you handle this one.
Yeah.
It says Link Jarrett left Notre Dame. Why?
Well, there's a multitude of reasons, and the biggest one is because that's his home. He was born in Tallahassee. He played for Florida State. He was a 4-year starter at shortstop. He's the NCAA leader in assists because he played 4 years at shortstop, went to the College World Series 3 times as a player. And, it had nothing to do with leaving Notre Dame. I shouldn't say it has nothing. They had 90% had nothing to do with Notre Dame. It had nothing to do with it. It had to do with going back to Florida State. For some coaches, there's the one job that they will take no matter what is happening. That is the Florida State job for Link Jarrett. I do not blame him in any way, shape, or form. Notre Dame is light years behind Florida State when it comes to facilities and everything else. That's a small part of it. It is still part of it, but it is a small part of it, and I guarantee you he got a raise as well. Small part of it, but the biggest chunk is that is his home, and that is where, it's in his heart, and I have no problem with him following his heart.
And he's not replacing his coach.
That's also true. He's replacing his coach's son.
Right. Exactly. Which matters.
By the way, took Florida State to the playoffs 2 years in a row and got fired. So
with the winning record this year.
So the bar is set a little bit higher down there.
And I think they kind of had an idea of who they were going to target.
You don't fire a coach after the regional if you don't know who you're going to get.
And everything we've heard, Sean was talking about this when he was in Omaha. Everybody knew. There was he didn't hide it. He didn't talk about, maybe you have to talk. He basically, everybody knew. Everybody knew it was going to happen. Look, the other thing too is playing in the North is a challenge. You can't play at home for the first basically almost month of the season unless you want to build an indoor facility, which is not happening.
Right, exactly.
So that's a challenge too. Recruiting in the North is a little bit more challenging. And here's the other thing that's difficult too. Yeah, right.
That's part of it.
Here's something you have to understand is because of Title IX, you only have 11 and a half scholarships.
7.
So guys aren't going on full rides. In Florida, at Florida State, first of all, that's a very deep baseball state. There's a ton of talent in Florida. For an in-state kid to go to Florida State, it's not that. It's pretty cheap. So you can make your scholarships go a lot longer when it comes to roster building. Notre Dame, if you're going to try to break that 11.7 into multiple players, then there's a lot of kids still paying a ton of money to have to go to Notre Dame, which makes roster building challenging. You're going to be much more Vince and I were talking about this the other day. Is every time that the baseball coaches hear Brian Kelly complaining about how hard it is to recruit, they just got to be like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. Exactly. Let me tell you how hard it is to recruit at Notre Dame. You know what I mean?
Like, scholarship. I think you can give up, the lowest you can give is 25%. Okay. Right. And it costs about $75K to go to Notre Dame when you figure in room and board and everything. Right. Okay. 25% is not going terribly far.
Right. If you give half, you know, but even for Florida State, like out-of-state tuition's not anywhere close to that. So if you're recruiting a kid from Georgia, Louisiana, Virginia, it's still going to be cheaper to go there than it is to go to Notre Dame, and you're going to play in better weather. It's better baseball weather.
There's certain states also, like for example, Louisiana, and somebody can correct me if they live down there, but the way I understand is if you have a certain GPA in the state of Louisiana at your high school, you get a free ride to go to a state school.
Right.
Guess
there are
what?
States like that.
Yeah. And guess what? That's a great incentive for if you're coaching at LSU to bring in a stud ball player who also happens to be smart. And by the way, there's a ton of baseball players who are really, really smart. Right. And you can go get that kid and not give him a dime of your athletic money because he's already gets to go to school.
Because it's different than football. Right. It's different than football. There's different rules governing baseball than football. Like you can't, you know, that's why people say, like, you know, is Link Jarrett going to, you know, is the baseball coach going to work with the football team to get, heck yeah, they are.
That's a free scholarship.
Exactly. Because a kid who's going to play on both sports has to, like in this instance, would have to be on the football scholarship.
Right. Exactly.
Like there's certain, it's like, I'd have to get into the rules, but he normally has to be on a football scholarship in this instance.
Right. Yep.
If he's going to be in that situation, if he's going to, So anyway, it's a different conversation for a different day.
And, you know, from a baseball standpoint, what are you giving up? You're giving up a uniform, basically. Like, hey, yes, I will work with you, football team, because you're giving him a full ride. Let's play ball. You know what I mean?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, and it's worked for them. They've had several baseball players not be good players.
They've got one coming who just won a state title.
All right, we got to wrap up here in the next 10 minutes. So let's try to work through some more of these questions, guys. John Harlow to Super Chat. Thank you very much, John. He says, how good are the twin defensive linemen from Connecticut we just offered this week? Ryan, that is for you.
Yeah, we just talked about this a little bit yesterday, actually, me and Brian. So Jared, who is more of the defensive tackle type, he is 6'4", 260 pounds. Someone compared him to Jason Adamalola a little bit on film, and I kind of see that a little bit. Like he's kind of moved up and down the line of scrimmage a ton. He's kind of slippery player. Like him as a gap penetration style player. Craziest stat I saw is those two combined in 10 games last year had 58 tackles for loss. Those two combined and 19 sacks. Just, not too bad. The D tackle was actually the one that had 12 sacks, and then the long edge, whose name is Jacob Smith. He is 6'5", 225 pounds. So he projects more to a Viper. It's weird because they actually run a 3-man front, so he's playing kind of more like a 4-eye at times on their defense, which is not what he's going to do on the next level. He's going to be a Viper at the next level. So he's got long, athletic. And what I really liked about him is he's got some bend to him too. Like this is not a stiff guy. Like he can bend that track a little bit. So I think they're good players, man. I mean, they're both top 100 kids on, I think it was 247 had them as top 100 recruits. So they're talented players without a doubt.
I could be wrong on this, Ryan, but I don't think they're identical twins like the Adamiolas, correct? They don't look alike.
They
like
do not
even in the face. They don't look alike.
I don't think they're identical. I think they're just,
like the Adamiolas have different body types to a degree, but they look
similar,
very similar.
Yeah, right.
Very similar.
Yeah.
And if they weighed the same, they'd look even more similar. Those two kids don't look the same in the face. So what would that be called? Like what's the fraternal. Vince, because your kids are identical, right?
Oh, they're fraternal.
They're fraternal. Okay, so Vince
has. I had an old lady argue with me one time. Like I
had who argue with you?
Old lady in the mall was like, "No, they're identical." No, why are you arguing with me?
I'm their dad.
So insane.
Anyway, sorry.
So insane. We got a couple super chats here. This is D-Troll Hunter for Ryan's bonus. So there you go, Ryan. You get 60% of a $1.99. Thanks, D-Troll Hunter.
I'll take it.
I'd say that he's a great poster. I love that guy. John Banco with a super chat for $2. Thank you very, very much for that, John. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop with a super chat. Thank you for that very much. CJ Carr has a great influence in recruiting so far. Guys committing early. Do you see Wingo and Brown joining the Irish? Sammy is a beast in the weight room and football field. Join IB board chat. Go Indy. Ryan's already addressed the Sammy Brown part. They're a player. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard to get him out of Georgia.
Sure.
But I think Wingo was the one that the relationship with CJ Carr because CJ Carr came in town yesterday, was with them. There's a picture of him with Coach Reese and Coach Stuckey and Ryan Wingo, where that's the one where I think you could see more of a, okay, that's where CJ Carr can really work his magic. Right. Is with a guy like that, who's not technically from the region. St. Louis is kind of backyard-ish for Notre Dame. If you have like a giant backyard, it's not like a kid from, Glenbard, in Illinois, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little different. Like, Cam Williams is Notre Dame's backyard. He's from Chicago area. That's Notre Dame's backyard.
I would call backyard.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think Ryan, that would be one where we're going to really see CJ Carr's recruiting chops with guys like Wingo, Micah Hudson, guys like that is when we're going to really see that impact. And I just love the fact the kid keeps coming back in town every time there's a big time receiver on campus. Absolutely love it.
Love it.
Absolutely love it.
Can I have a couple quick little interesting facts on these guys?
Yes,
real quick?
Of course.
So Ryan Wingo is the younger brother of Ronnie Wingo, who was the running back out of played at University of Arkansas a few years ago. And Sammy Brown at 6'2", 215 pounds. I think you'll like this one, Vince. 10'7" 100-meter guy as a sophomore, and a sub-22 200 guy, and a 22-plus foot long jumper. So my man is pretty athletic. Yeah.
And also Emilio Agard is on campus right now. He tweeted out a little bit ago, "I love it here!" exclamation mark. There's a video of him walking down the steps. So that's why we always say, folks, getting on campus is the key. Yeah. If you can get these kids on campus, they have a puncher's chance. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Got another super chat down here from JWick13. Congrats on 10K. To celebrate, will we get a video breakdown of some old Driscoll QB footage? No, thank you all. And it says no, thank you for all the daily content. So
I'll write a scouting report on it if you get it for me.
Yeah, just be careful. Just be careful.
I'll give you a player. I'll give you a player comp and everything.
I always tell you to be honest with your evaluations. That's one time where it would be very good for you and your family's future to lie.
I told you, man. 6-foot version of John Elway, right there.
There you go.
There
you go.
Slinging the rock. Baby.
Good answer. Okay.
Come on, Family Feud. Good answer.
John Banco also asked, do you think John gave us a super chat earlier? Thank you for that, John. Do you think Notre Dame's schedule will improve by default over the next few years by an improving ACC? Short answer, yes.
Yeah.
Vince, why don't you dive a little bit more into that?
Look, Notre Dame is roped into having to play 5 ACC teams. We talked about this a little bit earlier. You're almost like sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping you get Clemson on your schedule so that it boosts the caliber of your schedule. And if Clemson's not on your schedule, the ACC schedule's like, if they get better top to bottom, that only helps Notre Dame. That is almost half of the games that they have to play every single year. If the ACC is better, then Notre Dame's schedule is better. Bottom line. It's really that simple. And I know that's not like great analysis, but it's because
it is great analysis, because sometimes brevity can be great. You don't need to talk 10 minutes just to say something. Look, yes, they play 5 games a year against the ACC. If the ACC is better, you're not going to have situations like we just had.
Right, exactly.
Where Notre Dame plays, think about this. Notre Dame played Florida State. They played Wisconsin. They played Purdue. They played North Carolina, USC, Stanford. Like, they played some teams that normally you'd think, it's a pretty tough schedule. Because remember, North Carolina, remember before the season, it was really tough Notre Dame schedule. And Vince and I were like, no. But you look at it, though. But if these Virginia Tech on the road, it's another one. Like, in theory, if you're just talking about traditional success, that should have been a really challenging schedule at Virginia. But the ACC sucks right now.
Right.
And so that wasn't a tough schedule. If the ACC teams were sort of on similar traditional trajectory, an 11-1 Notre Dame team last year is a no-brainer in the college football playoff, because they'd have a road win over a top 10 Florida State team, right? They'd have a win over a top 15 Wisconsin team on a neutral field. They're Big Ten, but the point still stands. You'd have a road win over a top 25-ish Virginia team, and all of a sudden your schedule looks a lot better because those teams are where they traditionally are. And you look at the upcoming schedule, there's Florida State games on it, there's Miami games on it, there's Clemson games on it. So yes, if those teams can be a semblance of what they were in the past, that helps you. If Notre Dame beats Miami in 2015 or 17 and then beats Stanford 2 weeks later, them beating a top 10 ACC team on the road guarantees Notre Dame a playoff spot. They were 3rd going into that game in the college football playoff rankings. If they beat a top 10 Miami team on the road that week, yes, they are going to go on and be a playoff team. So yeah, if Miami stinks and then Stanford stinks, maybe you do fall out of the top 4. That's the reality of it. And, and that's kind of what happened to Notre Dame in 2015 before the Stanford loss. They kind of struggled to beat a 3-9 BC team, struggled to beat a 3-9 Wake Forest team. And it's like, you're doing that while Oklahoma's going on the road and beating TCU or whatever, right. Who was ranked, I think. So I think absolutely those things can help a bit and hurt quite a bit, to be honest with you. So good question. Good question. Actually, we had that one already. So here's an interesting one, guys. Stephen Robinson asked, with a first-year coach, first-year quarterback, and an exciting 2023 recruiting class, this year really feels like a transition year. I'm hearing a lot of that. Based on that, what would constitute a good and conversely bad season? So number one, I want you guys both to answer this way. Okay. Number one, do you view this as a transition year? And then number two, what would you constitute a good and conversely bad season for Notre Dame this year? Good meaning a championship in the playoff are obviously no brainers, but short of that, what would make for a good season for you?
Okay.
How
do you want us to do that?
Ryan, go ahead and start.
Yeah, no, I would say no. I wouldn't. Transition year. I mean, that makes it sound like you're expecting that there might be a possibility of not being great, right? Like it sounds like it's very transition year for me. Sounds like you're expecting like the next step, which like I get where you're going there, Stephen, but also I think if there's a lot more volatility usually to a transitional year. I don't consider it a transitional year. I really don't. I think that the expectation has the one really good thing that Coach Kelly did was you expect 10 plus wins, right? Like that is like, you consider that's something that he really did well at the end, is that you put a higher expectation off of what Notre Dame was doing for some time. Right. So what is a good year? I mean, you have to win 10 plus in the first season, in my opinion. I think you have to contend for a playoff spot. I think you have to be in the conversation at some point during the season. Conversely, what's a bad season? I think 9-3 or 8-4 is a bad season, to be honest. Like I think it's at the point where if you
set, right?
Yeah. There'd have to be an asterisk to that 9-3 season, meaning like you just had one of those weird, just everything went wrong injury wise. And by the end of the year, you're playing with like half your starting lineup from the opener. That would be the only way I would accept 9-3, to be honest with you guys. Vince, what's your answer to this question?
Well, I agree with what Ryan said. It's 10 plus is good. To me, I feel like that's the basement for acceptable. And maybe, again, that's a little PTSD because that's the bar that he has set. Mm-hmm. And I commend him for that because 10 wins is the basement as far as I'm concerned. So I think that it has to be that 10 plus. And as far as it being a transitional year, I want to preface this with saying I do not think last year was a transitional year, but if we're using that as a basis, it was more last year than it was this year because
it was 100%
to what they have now. And so, no, I don't think this is a transitional year at all. If you put a gun to my head and said, you got to pick one, it would be last year. It wouldn't be this year. So that's my answer.
Agree. And the argument you and I made last year, Vince, was this team could sneak up on some people because of the schedule.
Right.
Like, and because of Jack Cohn, but yes, it was a transitional year. And my point is you're going to lose a lot more off this year's team for next year than you lost off of last year's team for this year. Mm-hmm. A lot more. I mean, last year you lost Kyle Hamilton and Kyron Williams. Let's be honest. That's about it in regards to guys that were just really impact players. Maybe Kevin Austin, but he didn't do anything in any big games.
Right.
Next year, you're going to lose Jared Patterson, Josh Lugg. You're going to lose Michael Mayer, Isaiah Foskey, probably going to lose potentially could lose Brandon Joseph and Cam Hart. I mean, you're going to lose a lot more dudes off this year's team. Jason Adamiola, Justin Adamiola. You're going to lose a lot more impact players off this year's team, Braden Lindsey, Avery Davis, and depth players like that than you did off last year's team.
Right.
That's just the reality. So I don't get the whole transition year. I think there's this whole first year coach narrative that I don't buy into for two reasons. One is I think Marcus Freeman knows he's an experienced coach, which is why he got put the staff together that he did. And I talked about that in a recent mailbag, so I'm not going to address it again. Number two is I think the bar needs to be raised. And a perfect example, we've talked a lot about Ohio State on this channel this year. And that's because they play Ohio State and they were recruiting against Ohio State. We didn't used to talk about them because they were never recruiting against Ohio State and they didn't play Ohio State. Now they're doing both.
Right.
But the perfect example is the year that Ryan Day replaced Urban Meyer. This 2019 season was first year, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that his first year at Ohio State?
Sounds right.
Here's who they lost off that team from the year before. Nick Bosa, Dwayne Haskins, Paris Campbell, Draymond Jones, Terry McLaurin, Kendall Sheffield, Michael Jordan, Isaiah Prince, and Mike Weber. Those are the guys they had drafted. That's just the guys they had drafted. There's probably a couple other guys that didn't get drafted. Those are who they lost drafted. And what did they do the next year in the first year under Ryan Day with a first-year starter at quarterback? They went to the college football playoff and took Clemson down to the wire. Now, they'd have got pounded in the championship game, but everyone would have got pounded in the championship game that year, just like Clemson did. I mean, Clemson was the only team that had a shot to beat LSU that year, in my opinion. The only one that had a shot to beat LSU in the playoff. And they didn't. But they took a really good Clemson team down to the wire. And that wasn't as good as the 2018 Clemson team, but it was a lot better than the 2020 Clemson team. And so, but why? Because the coach had been there. He knew how it worked. And because he didn't make excuses for being a first-year coach or having a first-year quarterback. Now, he had Justin Fields, right? And I'm not saying Tyler Buchner's Justin Fields, but Tyler Buchner's not a bum either. And Tyler Buchner's been in the system for a year, and he's going to have a lot of talent around him. I think there's a continued, in my opinion, underrating by Notre Dame fans of the talent that Notre Dame brings back this year. I mean, we've talked about this, guys. There's 4 guys that are consistently getting preseason All-American love. 4. And that's Brandon Joseph, Isaiah Foskey, Jarrett Patterson, and Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talent coming back on this football team. There's multiple guys that some people consider one of the 2 or 3 best players in the nation at their position. Brandon Joseph, obviously, Jarrett Patterson, Michael Mayer, and Isaiah Foskey. Also, you have a guy like Cam Hart. Everybody's talking about the secondary. There's a lot of teams in the country that would die to have Notre Dame secondary. Is it good enough to win a championship? We'll find out. But it's not this terrible secondary. Like somebody in the chat recently was like, you're overrating the secondary because I said it's better than Ohio State's or at least a wash. You're overrating because, Houston Griffith, DJ Brown, and Clarence Lewis were bad last year. And my response was 2 of the 3 dudes you just mentioned don't even start.
Right.
Like, what are we talking about here? A couple backups, right? Like, okay, their backups weren't good. You know what I mean? Like, this is a talented football team. And I don't think this is a transition year. And the whole first-year starter quarterback, guess who else had a first-year starter quarterback last year? Alabama. Guess who else had a first-year starter quarterback last year? Ohio State. There's a lot of teams that have first-year starting quarterbacks. Hey, last time Clemson won a national title, not only did they have a first-year starter, they had a freshman. Now, again, Tyler Buchner's not Trevor Lawrence, but he doesn't have to be. And that's the point, is I think we're not giving – and I think it all boils down to that right there, guys. It's the fact that the shine came off of Tyler Buchner unnecessarily. I personally think Notre Dame fans should be fired up about Tyler Buchner based off what we saw last year. Because, okay, he is a dynamic athlete. Because here's the thing. Well, how well does what he did translate to college? He played in bad football. The biggest thing that I was concerned about translating against the competition he played was his running ability. Like that was, is he truly that dynamic of an athlete to do what he did in high school? Well, that question was answered. There's some things he's got to do as a passer, but that's an easier transition to make. And so I think that's what it boils down to. But Stephen, this is a great question, Stephen. We're not hammering you for this. This is a great question. I think it's created good conversation. I personally don't think that it should be a transition year. And if we were going to accept 9-3, then that would make us big freaking hypocrites. And it would make us be anti-Brian Kelly people just because we don't like Brian Kelly. We held Brian Kelly to a standard, and there's no reason we shouldn't hold Marcus Freeman to that same standard. Right? And that's where it should be. And this is definitely a team that should be held to that standard.
Yes.
Now, is it national championship or bust? That's always a bad standard. I've never liked that standard.
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to tell me that Air Parsegian failed in 10 of 12 years. No. You gotta, like Ryan said, minimum 10 wins, playoff contender. That's where you got to be for me to say this was a good year. Anything worse than that, it's a disappointing year. For it to be a bad year, I'd have to say 8-4 or worse to use bad. I think 9-3, Ryan, would be disappointing for me, but I don't know if I'd call it bad. And I think that so 8-4 or worse, though, to me is bad with this, even with injuries. You're still with injuries going to have a more talented team than at least 9 of the teams that you play.
I think that the transitional year also is a little bit of PTSD, though, to be honest, because people
made those excuses all the time.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's like, let's be honest here, right? Notre Dame is recruiting at an all-time high. There's energy around the program. We think they put together a great staff. It's okay to be excited. It's okay to have big expectations. When you throw in, it might be a transitional year, that's like you're setting yourself up for a fall. Like, let's not set ourselves up for a fall. It's okay to be excited. It is, right. I promise.
It is. And it's okay not to use excuses for why your team, don't make excuses for your team's failures that you're anticipating happening. That right there is the epitome of BKPTSD. You're waiting, something bad is going to happen. So you're going to convince yourself that it's okay and that it's going to happen beforehand, right? Expect this team to be good. Does that mean that if they lose to Ohio State in the opener, it's a failure? No, but you can't get your butt whooped either. You should not get outclassed by Ohio State. If you go toe-to-toe with Ohio State for 4 quarters and you lose to them, okay. Right? Like, that's a good step. Now it's get better for the next 11 games, because if you get a rematch against them next time, I'm not going to say it's okay because it's going to be on neutral field, right? Like we saw in Georgia in 2017, that Georgia loss and the way Notre Dame lost actually gave that team a lot of confidence going forward. Like, hey, we went toe-to-toe with these boys and we should have beat them. We just made some mistakes. I feel bad for the next couple opponents. I mean, if that's a similar outcome to this game, I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to say it's okay, but I'm going to understand and say, okay, let's see what they do now. And then if they go out and just steamroll people like I think they would, like, I think this team is going to be pissed if they don't beat Ohio State.
And
I really do.
They should be. I mean, that's how you should go into this game. It's not you don't go into this game like you're a MAC school going to Notre Dame for a payout. Like that, you should be lit if you don't win this game.
But for me, it's more about what do you do with that? And that's what I loved about the 2017 team. It's like the 2019 team when they lost to Georgia, like they didn't recover mentally, in my opinion. Like, I know that they did this and that, but like I just never felt like that team recovered. I never felt like that team really kind of got back to being what Vince they should have been in when they lost to Georgia in 2019. And I know they had some wins, but like that was just a sloppy year all around for me. Yeah. Like you go out the next week against Virginia, like weren't they losing at halftime? Or it was like, I mean, just there was no energy. Just where the next week after the 2017 loss to Georgia, I mean, you kind of slept through the first quarter against BC, you ripped a couple of runs, but man, by the third quarter, Notre Dame was just physically destroying Boston College. I mean, think about this. They ran for over 500 yards against a team that had Harold Landry starting at defensive end and had Zach Allen on their defensive line. Think about that. Ran for over 500 yards. I mean, that's what I want to see. And I think that's what this team is capable of. So I get excited. Like Ryan said, it's okay to be excited. It's okay. And just losing to Ohio State doesn't mean that here we go again. They get blown out, then I can understand that. But that's not the expectation that I have for this football team. They may not beat Ohio State on the road. It's going to be a tough ask for anybody.
It's going to be a real interesting game show. Correct. No matter what happens.
Correct.
But people's expectations are going to be ridiculously through the roof, or we're going to have to have people on suicide. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot in between.
It's coming up some very dark expressions today, man. Goodness gracious, buddy. Last question from Ian Johnson, and we're going to wrap up here because I know, Vince, you got to roll here your last day of school. But and actually, Vince, if you need to take off, we can handle this one too. Yeah. Because I know you have an opinion, but I think you and I are going to have a very similar opinion on this. So
I'm sure we will.
I know you got grades to submit. I said this is Vince's last day of school, so he's got some errands he's got to take care of.
Yeah, exactly.
So, hey, Vince, thanks for joining us today, buddy.
See you, Vince.
So, Ryan, this question for me and Johnson is: how do you know if the ACC gets better? Wouldn't it look like they kind of cannibalize themselves in conference and look worse due to the losses to each other? My thing is, you're still seeing that. When teams are all bad, the records are still the same. It's just you watch a team play and you're like, hey, that's good. But the difference is you start having more out-of-conference success.
Exactly, yeah. I was going to say, like, parity isn't exclusive to being good or bad, right? Like,
can I throw a stat out, Ryan?
Yeah.
I guarantee you that in this year that the SEC will be 500 against the SEC.
Yes.
I mean, that's you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing is, like, you're going to have the same amount of wins and losses in the league in conference no matter what. There's no way around it.
Right.
It's what are you doing outside of it? So please continue. I just wanted to get that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, I think we think that parity is like it is exclusive to one side or the other, but like you can be parity in a very good way. Like every team is good across the board. They're cannibalizing each other, like this question says, or it could be like, wow, these teams are all bad. So like they're just losing some, winning some. And that's what you don't want. Like you want good football teams. And I think, like you said, are they beating out of conference opponents? Are they showing well against other elite tier programs outside of their conference? Like for me, that's where you see now, what is the quality of this conference? This is why I hate the raw numbers thing. This is why I fight back against a lot of analytics, because this is a game of people, right? So like it's the eye test for me. That's what it always comes down to, honestly.
Out of conference success, eye test, but it's also about there being good teams in the league. Like if anything's like a perfect example is when the SEC West was actually really good. Like and even when the SEC was really good, like in the 90s, to me that was my favorite era of the SEC. Because you had like Florida and Tennessee and Georgia all were pretty good in the North. And then you had, Bama had some runs there. Auburn had some runs there. You had LSU had some runs there. I mean, but like, it was like Florida and Tennessee every year would kind of knock each other somebody would knock the other out of the title game. Right. But you still knew they were both really good football teams. What makes the ACC bad is when Clemson goes to the title game and beats a 7-5 Pitt team. Because, at the time they were 7-5. They end up losing the ACC title game, and then they go lose the bowl game. They finish 7-7. Like, it's not good, And so it's like getting the ACC say, well, the ACC is Clemson's not going to go undefeated anymore because they got to play a legit Miami and a legit Florida State. But those teams are legit though, just like we know in the Big Ten, like just like we know in the SEC West. I also think what would happen is you'd actually see less parity in the ACC because the teams that are not good would become really bad again. Because that's what's happening now. Some of those teams that like really stink are maybe getting 4 or 5 wins a year because the other teams aren't good, where you're going to go back to seeing Duke at 2-10 again. And maybe Duke's a bad example because I'm hoping Mike Elko is successful. But Wake Forest is going to struggle to have some of the runs they've had because Florida, they're not going to beat Florida State anymore. They're not going to beat Miami anymore, right? So you actually have, when the conference is healthy, in my opinion, you actually have less parity.
Right.
Because the teams that are really good start dominating more, and there's not as much. It's like that's the issue with the Big 12. Like the Big 12 has been one of the most competitive conferences in college football in the last 6 or 7 years. But part of that is because there are no great teams in the Big 12. Like even Oklahoma, like they're still going to lose a game a year to somebody's going to knock them off, whether it's TCU, Iowa State, and that's fun. But that's why Oklahoma goes out and gets their butts kicked in the playoff, right? So to me, it's because the top half of the conference isn't good anymore. Like a really healthy conference is going to have 3 to 4 like really good teams, 3 to 4 just garbage teams, and then sort of teams in the middle. What's the problem with the ACC is there's like one really good team and then a bunch of crap in the middle, right? There aren't any bad teams in the ACC because nobody's good enough to make the bad teams look as bad as they are. Right. And I think that's to me is why it would help, because you can look at the ACC and say, yeah, their conference record was the same as the SEC conference record, because that's what it does. But then look what they did in these, it's getting to where, Florida State's not getting dominated by Florida every year. And Georgia Tech's competitive against Georgia. Maybe wins once every 5 or 6 years, but they're competitive other times. It's where you start to see Louisville be more competitive against Kentucky, like you were talking about earlier, Ryan. Like that's when you start to see some of this. Like, BC goes off and wins some big non-conference games. Virginia Tech goes and shocks somebody non-conference. I think those are the things you see. Miami doesn't go play Alabama in a neutral field and just get curb stomped. They may lose, but they're at least competitive. Right. Those are the things where the conference is healthy, even though the conference record is going to be the same. It's the non-conference stuff that starts to change. And and also there's an eye test to this too, Ryan. Mm-hmm. You can watch a 3-9 or 9-3 team play in one league and be like, they're not very good. And then you can watch a 9-3 team in another league and be like, man, that team's really good. If they were in that league, they'd win it. I mean, there's also that to it as well. 100%. And now I'm not talking about the hype of, ESPN hype of, every 6-6 team in the SEC goes to the ACC and they win it all. No, because they'd still get killed by Clemson, right? Just like South Carolina does every year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like that's the reality of it. But sometimes you can look and say, boy, that team would have gone to the ACC and been pretty good.
Perfect example was Wake Forest for me last year. That weren't they like 11-2 or something? At some
they were really good.
That team's not that good, man.
No.
Like, they're not that
No.
good. You know, like they're
No.
a solid team. They're not. They're
Right.
nothing like that.
Right. Yeah, they went 11-3 last year and beat Rutgers in a bowl game. But here was their out of conference schedule. They played Army, who they gave up 56 points to. They played Old Dominion and Norfolk State. And then they beat Rutgers in a bowl game. And they went 11-3. If the ACC was healthy, they're an 8-5 team, 9-4 at best.
That Rutgers team was also a team that didn't even make the bowl.
They were not originally bowl eligible.
Yeah,
they had to replace a team. Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
They had a losing record.
They were 5-7.
Yeah.
Yes, 5-7 to your point, and they won 2 Big Ten games. But to Ryan's point, they were actually 5-7 and only had 4 wins over FBS teams because one of their wins was over Delaware, and that's who Rutgers beat in a bowl game. So yeah, that 11-3 team is not as good as some teams in other leagues that have gone like 7-5. With all due respect.
Yep.
And that's why when Wake Forest tends to go to bowl games against good teams, they tend to not perform well. I mean, look what happened to them against Wisconsin the year before. You know, they have their years every now and then. They lost to Michigan State 2 years ago. You know, I mean, that's kind of they can't beat Notre Dame, right? I mean, they're usually not overly competitive against Notre Dame, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
So you had that's just kind of my 2 cents on that, Ryan. So anything else you'd like to add before we roll out of here?
No, like I said, out of conference and the eye test is the biggest thing for me. Absolutely.
Yeah. Everybody, this was a great show. Hey, don't go anywhere, okay? Because we got a couple things for you real quick. Reminder, 5:00, we are going to be back for our Jack Larson podcast. He's going to make his announcement at 5:00. We'll be there live for that. We'll let you guys know we'll obviously see what his decision is. And once he makes his decision, we will talk about it and see what it means for Notre Dame and what's next for Notre Dame moving forward. We may have a special guest on our show, perhaps this evening. We'll see. We're working on that, efforting that as we speak. That'll start at 5:00 Eastern. We'll go live then, and we'll carry that. It'll be a typical one of these deals as we'll kind of talk about where things stand, who the contenders are, let the young man make his announcement, and then we will break down what that decision means for him. Also, next Wednesday, we will also have a second show next Wednesday at 8 p.m. That is when Cam Williams is going to make his announcement, so we'll be there for that as well. So you're definitely going to check back for that. But that's why you need to, Ryan, you need to make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, because then you'll know when we go live. And as May,
I was about to say, I think Mace covered everything.
So
here.
Mace let me know he was out of town. That's why he couldn't step up and come correct, but he is back with us, and he came correct. Join that message board, everybody. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, leave a 5-star review. Visit the IB store for some awesome merch, and go Irish. Ryan, couldn't say any better than that. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great show. We can continue these conversations on the message board. Until then, though, we will see you at 5:00 for the next edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast.